All right, everybody. Welcome to Project Herpetoculture Podcast. This is episode 20. I'm your host, Roy Arthur Blodgett, joined as always by Philip Leitz. And before we jump in and introduce our guest, I'll go through our usual housekeeping. I want to give a shout out to Dylan on the Animals at Home Network for hosting us.
Go.
That's right. And also mention our sponsors. So we have Custom Reptile Habitats. If you're in the market for a really nice premium PVC reptile enclosure, check them out. We have a link in the show notes and description. And if you make a purchase after clicking through that link, we will get a bit of a commission at no extra cost to you. And that really helps us out keeping this thing going. We also have cold-blooded caffeine for those coffee drinkers out there. They offer some amazing both single origin and blended roasts. And Phil and I are both avid coffee drinkers, so we're really grateful to have them on board. And you can find another link in the show notes and description, and a little discount code there, sweeten the deal. And lastly, we have Redline Shipping. Same thing. We got a show notes description link, a little discount code, and so far they're doing great. Got an awesome reputation already with reptile shipping. So give them a try if you haven't already. And one last little plug is just for our Patreon. For those who are just interested in supporting the show directly, you'll see a link to our Patreon in the show notes and description. And we really appreciate any support that our listenership can offer there. It's been great so far. So with all of that out of the way, I am very pleased to introduce our guests today, all the way from Australia, Scott and Ty Eipper. Welcome.
Hey guys.
G'day. How you going?
Great. So good to have you on the show. So just to begin, I know that you both wear many different hats within herpetoculture, herpetology, more generally. You're authors, keepers, demonstrators. So I'm curious if you could just kind of summarize your roles for the listeners and just how each of the two of you fits into those.
Sleep deprived. I don't know. We just make it work. Podcast for me. I'm a one-word answer.
So basically the business has got a number of different arms. We have a writing side of things and a research side of things, so which basically produces books and also produces papers and things like that. We have a demonstration side of the business which conducts training as well as educational displays to the public, and then we have a book side of the business as well, where we actually sell her books to the public, which has only just sort of been launched in its infancy this week, actually, funnily enough. So so we can go down that road a little bit as well. But historically, we also used to do emergency removals from people's houses. That has now changed into a different side of things now, where we don't do emergency removals anymore, but we conduct reptile consultancy services. So we'll go and talk to a business about the issues that they might have with reptiles and provide solutions that are long-term solutions as opposed to a reactive solution, which are an emergency, which realistically the science doesn't actually support the translocation of reptiles. And we'd rather vote with our feet and not continue to conduct emergency removals out of houses. So and from businesses. So that might be something we can talk about at some point a little bit further on.
Yeah, I'm really curious about that, actually, just because that's actually something I do here. I offer services related to that, particularly for rattlesnakes. So we have one species where I am here, the Northern Pacific rattlesnake, Crotalus oregonus, and I have the same outlook on it, where it's I pretty much will only do removals as a last resort. And my primary kind of flagship offering is consultations, because I think that people, so often homeowners and businesses, fail to realize that if you're having habitual occurrences with rattlesnakes right up next to your house, then you're incentivizing them to be there.
Yeah.
They don't really want
Usually.
anything to do with us otherwise. Yeah, usually. So do you find that to be the same with the species that you're finding there? I mean, you're working with a much broader diversity, and also with elapids rather than pit vipers, but just curious if that's your experience.
Yeah, so it depends on the taxa. Essentially, though, you know, there's 3 reasons that animals move around in the environment. Okay, so they're either moving for food, they're moving for mates, or they're thermoregulating. Right, so essentially they're the 3 primary reasons that those animals are moving around in that ecosystem. So if you can go to a place and you can remove the attracting factors that are bringing the animals to that location, or divert them to somewhere that is better, then you're going to basically, by a war of attrition, sort of prevent snakes from attending those properties. It's not a perfect thing, because animals have got different ecology, and so there's always going to be some differences. And so as a result, you can change things around. So it might be that your grain storage that a facility has, removing the rodent, the things that are attracting the rodents. And by removing that, you also remove the things that want to eat the rodents that are coming in there to eat, right? So the snakes aren't necessarily wanting to go to that property to eat there. They're not. They're basically, what they're going is they're going after rodents to eat the rodents that are to be going to that property. So if you can prevent the rodents from going there, that works out well. Likewise, getting into the house. If you make sure that the house is sealed up in such a way that snakes can't get in, you don't have the issue. The problem is people need to get into the house as well. So you're always going to have points of failure and, you know, underneath doors, but there's ways you can mitigate that. And it's the same thing with the property itself. You can put decent quality fences up. If you have decent quality fences up with decent doors, decent gates that prevent the access of snakes coming into the property, then they aren't necessarily going to have snakes come in. The problem with that is, though, is that if you do get a snake that comes into the property, it's very hard for that same snake to leave if it finds its way in as well. So there is a 2 sides to every coin in that regard. And then the other one, and the one that's sort of our preferred, is to actually teach people how to live with these things. So not understand that they're living in an environment that the snake was living in well and truly before they were, and then provide them solutions on ways that they can live with the animal, as opposed to, you know, and it might be something as simple as, all right, you want to walk around at your place at night, walk around with a torch, put shoes on your feet, do all these sorts of things that are going to minimize an adverse or a poor reaction when you encounter a snake. Look where you put your hands before you put your hands, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Are people generally, like, on average, pretty responsive to your suggestions? I mean, obviously, perhaps they're probably only getting a hold of you because maybe they have a specific way they want to handle this anyway. But I'm thinking of so many people here in the States who have, like, very negative views towards reptiles in general, and so I guess I'm sort of trying to gauge what your perspective is on the general consensus in Australia.
I think people with a higher fear factor are more the ones that are going to keep their yard maintained, keep the doors shut, put fly screens on, walk around in shoes, carry a torch, because they just don't want the encounter. We've done a few hoarders. That was
Oh, no way.
Oh, yeah.
Tell us about that. That sounds awesome.
I probably don't think I should, because I get overexcited, like, oh my God, it's a hoarder.
Awesome, honestly.
Yeah, but they expect you to find it, and you're just looking at shit everywhere, basically, boxes everywhere, crap everywhere. They don't want you to move anything. They want you to find it. They don't want to hear, and they won't, try and help themselves.
Right.
So I guess it depends on the person. And
I think too, the other side of it is that you've got usually we're not going out to these places going, hey, do you want our services? They're contacting us. Right. So there's a bias already in that regard, right? So you've already got people that have self-recognized that they have a problem. Whatever that problem is if we break it down into its basic points, they have either a snake or multiple snakes that are coming to their place of work or where they live, and they don't want them there, right? So that's the number one issue, right? Now, we offer a free identification service. We don't charge people to have a look at a photo or anything like that, so they know. So we will tell them if it's dangerously venomous or whatever it might be. And then the other thing, and this is probably one of the most significant things in Australia, it's actually illegal to capture or kill a snake unless it is causing a direct threat to that person.
Oh.
So if it's causing a direct threat, the workplace health and safety regulations allow for the killing of a snake.
How do they define that threat? What are the metrics by which they determine?
Well, see, this is where it becomes really arbitrary and interpretation. But essentially, it basically means that you're able to kill something if it's a direct threat to you. If you feel threatened by it and it has directly threatened you, then potentially it's a threat. Now, we argue that a non-venomous snake is not going to cause a threat to a person. Right? Now, it's also the reason that you're allowed to remove an animal from a premises from the legislation point of view too, the way it's held over here by the licensing systems, is that you should only be removing an animal if it's causing a threat to a person. The fact that it's an embuggerance to somebody isn't actually a legal requirement to remove the animal. So
pet owners that they let their cats out nightly, or they've got a small dog and it's in the yard, dog doesn't come inside, and they're terrified that this python's gonna
And so there is an ability within the legislation that if that person feels threatened or their livestock is threatened, then the animal can be relocated. So that's where if somebody has a small cat or a dog or a bird or something like that, that python is threatening my pet, and so I want it moved on.
But some of these people too, you're like, they'll send you a photo. You'll identify it as a python. They're talking about an adult cat, and this is like a yearling, and you're sort of going, going down. There's no, but I guess they're that scared for their pet. They don't see reason. They just want it on.
Yeah, and I remember that the different people, the people that are listening to this podcast and the people that are speaking on this podcast have got an affinity with reptiles, right? So we like reptiles. We've got to understand that there's things out there that, that people don't like. And a lot of people out there that do not like reptiles. And there's people out there that have got genuine phobias, and a phobia is effectively an uncontrollable fear of a thing. So you've got to take a standard idea, take that off, put that to the side, and ignore that completely. You can't use a normal thought. It's an illogical process when someone is that scared of something that they have a phobia. And so all of the logic in the world is not going to help that person. So, that's where you need to turn around and say, well, look, okay, the animal needs to be removed. It needs to be removed. We don't like the removal because of an animal from a property is not because of how it impacts on people. It's how it impacts on the snake itself.
Right.
Isn't any translocation studies that I've read, particularly in Australia for that concern elapids, that show a reasonable rate of success for translocation. All right. If you look at the studies that have been on Massasauga rattlesnakes, If you look at the studies on dugites, if you look at the studies on tiger snakes, you look at studies on anything, as soon as you start to remove them from an area that's outside of their normal home range, the chances of successful translocation are extremely small.
Mhm.
To the point where I don't think there's basically anything has survived greater than 3 or 4 years after it's been translocated.
Wow.
But you're then putting into something that is actually a really, are you just putting an animal into a slow, painful death?
Right.
So the question as a translocator that needs to be asked, and needs to be asked a lot more firmly, is not how to capture the animal from the place, is what you are going to do with that animal when you release it, right? So it's easy for most people to just sit there and go, well, I'll just go and release it at the nearest patch of bushland. Well, the nearest patch of bushland should already have its fill of second-tier predators.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So now you're going to release that, use your Norpac example there, Roy.
Mhm.
If you've got enough Norpacs in that particular gully or that particular gorge that you're going to release that into, the minute that you take another Northern Pacific rattlesnake and release that into that place, one of two things is going to happen. You're either going to have that Northern Pacific rattlesnake that you've released die a slow death, or alternatively, you're going to cause stress on the rest of the Northern Pacific rattlesnake population that's there.
Right.
Also going to impact on the feed animals for those Northern Pacific rattlesnakes, so the prey items, right? So through a human interaction, you've made a conscious decision that this Northern Pacific rattlesnake is more important than the feed animals that are sitting in that particular location. You've potentially altered the genetics of that structure, so the population genetics is now potentially changed if the animal successfully reproduces with others. So I suppose it comes down to a question of ethics of whether or not that is actually something that we should be doing.
But at the same time, there are people that are like, you're not coming out, I've got a shovel.
Yeah,
So-
exactly. That's always the
Right.
predicament.
Yeah.
That's always the predicament that I'm facing with that. And yeah, I think that the other side of this whole thing too is that translocation isn't a solution to the problem, right? It's like I always stress that every time I'm dealing with a homeowner or a business owner that's asking me to move the snake, is that, okay, I can move this snake, but if this snake is here, there are others here as well. And I will never find them all, nor would I want to, nor would you want me to, in terms of like how it would impact your life and your, micro ecology here. These animals are performing a service to you by being here.
Yeah.
And so it's, again, it all comes back down to education, right? And actually, like, I try to view each of these encounters when they do come up as like an opportunity really to orient to the person, and to minimize, to make it as minimize the amount that it's about the snake and maximize the amount that it's about the person. And it's kind of funny because it's like I got into this line of work, so to speak, because I love the snakes and because I'm not really great with people, but then I have to be better with people to advocate for the snakes.
And I suppose that's the thing, right? I think the other side of it is there's a genuine want by the people that are removing, for the most part, the people that are removing snakes from people's houses. Most of those people have a real affinity for snakes. They really like snakes, and they really think that what they're doing is a positive.
Right.
What they always understand is the science behind the translocation and just how poor it is. The animals all the animals that have gone through radiotelemetry studies go through this period of hyperactivity. They have been released. So this initial hyperactivity period exposes them to more threats. So they're exposed to more predators. They're more inclined to come into contact with people again. They're more to get hit by cars on roads because this animal is stressed out.
It's disoriented.
It is trying to find its way back to its home range.
Right, exactly.
And eventually it gets to a point where if it doesn't die during that hyperactivity period, it then starts to settle down. but then it needs to find all its own resources again, find places where it can get water, where it can get food, etc., etc. And then that animal, if it's a male, is then going to be potentially has to establish a territory, which means that now it's going to impinge on these other animals that are in that area. Is it fair as a translocator to translocate an animal and then due to a human interaction that has been made that a human has decided that it's an embuggerance for that snake to be there, you as the translocator are now causing an embuggerance to all of these other animals that happen to be sitting in that location.
Yeah, it's
that was something that I wasn't okay with, and that's why which is why we don't sort of offer those emergency translocations more, because at the end of the day, we can put people on to people that still do it, that work in it, and they do it to the best of their ability. And we particularly do that for people that have got, something like a dangerously venomous species that's trapped inside a house.
Yeah.
But realistically, ideally, what we should be doing is getting people to take that animal outside of that house, release it into the yard of that, so the animal doesn't have that impact and it can still continue to do on what it's doing.
Right.
It is difficult though, dealing with the public on trying to get them to understand that it's okay to have snakes.
It's a hard sell.
Concept has changed though. Like 10 years ago, you would get screaming men and women, terrified people on the phone, not able to tell you where they lived or anything like that. No, just come get it. Whereas when we did, towards the end, when we stopped doing it, there was a lot more, okay, so what's going to happen? Is it going to come chase me? What can I do? Et cetera, et cetera. They're a lot more open and calmer. So I think public perception is changing. I don't think it's fast enough.
And look, we have dangerously venomous snakes here come through our property.
Our neighbour is feral though. Right? Absolutely feral.
So we have red belly black snakes and we have eastern brown snakes come through our property.
Right.
We've translocated a snake from our property ever. Right. And so we're mindful that where we put our hands and things like that, there could be a snake there. All right. I walk into the garage and here you go, here's boxes that have been knocked off the ground because a carpet python's moved into the garage chasing a rat or something. I'm a herp. This is a good problem to have, And we spoke to our neighbours, and our neighbours have said, we've seen one snake in 20 years. We see a snake every probably about once a month. We'll see a snake come through the property. It's just, we have a search image already in our minds. We know we know the signs, and so we see them all the time. And I actually use that now. I use that analogy when I'm talking to people. So look, we have snakes in our property all the time. Our neighbours don't think they get them. We see them on average once a month. It's all about explaining to people the amount of animals that you don't see that are still there and you live just fine with them. So, it takes time, but eventually I think it'll be a very interesting question to ask that same question in 20 years' time to see where we're at, to see where is.
Yeah, I agree. It's like, I think that again, it's just like the best armament a homeowner can have is just awareness, understanding awareness of what they're living with. And I think that, a lot of times it's like people move out into the country, they move out into the bush to feel closer to nature, but they're preferred parts of it. And I think this is something that Phil and I are often talking about, that like there's actually a benefit to having encounters even with animals that can eat you. As long as you survive them, I think that there's like a benefit to the human spirit to know you're not at the top of the food chain, to know that there's powerful forces are still out there in nature, even after our radical attempts to civilize everything. But that's kind of a whole other topic. And I wasn't expecting us to get onto translocation at all, so I'm glad that we waded into that. But I'm curious to get into a bit more of the herpetoculture side of things. And one question I have, just herpetoculture, I can imagine, is very different in Australia in some ways than it is in North America, Europe, Asia. And I'm curious if you could summarize just broadly like the state of herpetoculture in Australia. How is it different from, say, North America or Europe?
I suppose the first thing is that, you know, the herpetoculture scene down here is just like it is in Europe, and as I imagine it is in the USA as well. We haven't been to the US, so, you know, we can only comment on the US herp scene from what we've seen via social media, etc. But it is an amalgamation of various different types. You have your typical pet keepers, and then you have your more specialist collections, small collections, right through to fairly large scale quasi-commercial setups here as well. Quasi-commercial because each state in Australia has a licensing system. So you cannot just go out and get reptiles effectively without a license. There is some form of legislation in all states. Now that varies depending on the state, depending on what restrictions might be in play. So some states have got a policy where you're not allowed to sell reptiles at all, and you can only keep reptiles that have been found in that particular state. Okay, and you're not allowed to have any species that are classified as threatened or rare. You still need to hold a license, and that's what they call a herpetology permit, which allows you to keep a small number of various species. Other states have got schedules of species that you're allowed to keep, and those schedules are generally tiered. And so you have a basic tier, an intermediary tier, and then you've got an advanced tier. And then you may have an additional tier on top of that for venomous snakes as well, and crocodilians. Other states, you pay some money and you get your license, and you can keep pretty much whatever you want to keep. Restricted to native Australian species only. We do not effectively have a legal exotic reptile or amphibian trade here in the country, with the exception of axolotls. Axolotls are allowed to be kept without a license. They're the only non-native reptile or amphibian that are allowed to be kept without a permit in Australia. So
that's interesting.
The axolotls, I think, are a byproduct of the fish keeping community in a lot of ways. They used to come in the aquarium industry, and so that's where they've come from. So the fact that they're you tell people that they're actually a salamander from North America it blows people's minds. But particularly if you drop the water and add iodine to the water and actually cause them to go out of that neotonic state. You know, somebody a metamorphed axolotl, it tends to blow people's mind. But anyway,
amazing, yeah.
As we slide off to the side there, this system of licensing in all of the states has led to a difficulty in people purchasing pets in a ad hoc fashion, right? So you can't just go and get your license and then go and buy a snake from the pet shop, right? You put your license in, it takes 2 to 3 weeks most of the time to come back before you get your permit. And so you don't have that straight off reactive, I want to go and buy this. So they go to the shop and they go and buy it. You also have significant restrictions in regards to how you can display animals. So you can only do educational displays with a specialist permit for that. That is usually a commercial permit that is fairly expensive. And then there's requirements to explain how you would go about doing those educational shows. So you need to basically run your educational content by the department. So this is how I'm going to conduct this. And then you restrict it to your requirements within your permit to follow that. So that's a whole nother side of things. So you don't have people going down to the local shop with a carpet python around their neck. They don't go down to the park with a snake around their neck. They don't bring it.
They do.
Yeah. Well, they do. Illegal.
Yeah.
And so that impinges on things like commercial trade in shows, right?
Right, exactly.
For you to bring an animal to a show, you might have to sign it on to a show permit holder, which means you can't sell that animal. If you don't sell it during the show, you can't sell that animal for 6 months because you've got trade restrictions and license restrictions on your permits on how quickly you can sell animals, unless you have a commercial permit that allows you to buy and sell and trade, right?
And each state being different, when people out of state go to the shows, say someone from Victoria comes to one up here or in New South or vice versa, it gets nasty. You see people getting mean and loud and horrible because one full of cash and they wanted to buy, didn't look into that state's laws and they can't buy.
Yeah.
So reptile
Yeah.
do as well here as they would in the States because of all the laws and the restrictions.
So can you imagine going to a Tinley Park show and then the only people that were able to buy animals were people that were in Illinois?
Oh yeah, that'd be gnarly.
Right. Or they go to California, to the
Yeah.
California Super Show. The only people that can buy animals are in California.
Jeez.
Right. And then you need to get permission. So every time that you want to take an animal into, say, let's say you want to display your animals at the California Super Show, you would have to get state-based permission and a permit to transfer your animals across, bring them across straight lines, bring them to a place, display them, get permission to display them, explain how you're going to do that display, then to do your display for a single day. It's just not going to happen. It's too much work.
Yeah.
So people do it. The other thing is population. You know, we have 27 million people in Australia, right? Of that 27 million, you know, what is it? I think we've got 200,000 license holders
And Australia
across the
big.
country, right? So 200,000 license holders across 8 states and territories. It is a massive country. Our country is the same size as the US. And we don't have anywhere near the numbers. So, you know, we the ham show in Germany, what is it, 12 weeks ago in September or what it was. And, you know, the amount of reptile keepers that were at that place was greater than all of the reptile keepers that were in Australia at the time.
Oof. Wow.
Amazing.
So, you know, it's a very different sort of understanding under there. There are people that do work in herpetoculture as a business. You know, they're breeding mutations essentially of pythons for the most part, or they're breeding species that command high dollar values because they're in very low numbers. And so, you know, there are people that do it for a living like that. There are people like that us that do it for a living as well, to a point where we are doing educational displays, we're doing consultancy, we breed and sell a little bit, but then obviously too, we're looking to diversify there, and why we're doing herp books as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's basically enough to run the collection itself and pay for itself, whereas, and pay some money to us. We don't get paid a hell of a lot for what we do, to be honest. But the is that I've also got a 9-to-5 style job as well that makes sure that we've got a roof over our head and keeps the lights on.
Right.
And I'm supposed to clean the house.
Wow. I'm kind of flabbergasted that you're able to do all of these things. You know, I mean, like,
Oh, I'm 20.
clearly you have this like very entrepreneurial way that you're doing it. Yeah, like you said, you're diversifying it and everything, but it's just from dealing with my meager collection and just the necessities of life, I'm impressed by that. Phil, did you have a question there? I thought you would.
Yeah, no, I was I was just sort of gonna ask a little bit more about some of that the business side of that, because if it's a small with so few license holders and so many restrictions that you have to sort of abide by. You said that there are people who manage to do it for a business and they're mostly breeding pythons. What about like the feeder industry? Is there much of a feeder industry going on behind that, or how are people getting feeders?
So
for
rodents, so we breed our own rodents because of the cost.
Oh, gotcha.
So
Some people though get into rodents thinking they're going to make their millions and don't realize the work, because over the years we've seen so many rodent breeders come and go. And I think you walk into a pet shop. Last time I worked in a pet shop, one rabbit was like $40.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So a large adult rat for commercial, right? So commercial breeders, a large adult rat. And this is somebody that's purchasing thousands of dollars worth of rodents. $10 Australian for a rat, a single rat.
Wow.
So you talk a commercial collection, they might have 300 adult snakes that are eating 150 adult rats every week. So if you say every animal is eating every second week, right? They're eating a medium sized to adult rat or whatever it is. So you work $7.50 by 150. You're looking at, what's that, $1,000 a week.
Whoa.
Going out just in rats.
didn't.
That's not including any holdbacks, any juvenile rats or anything like that are going through, which are selling for anywhere between $1.50 to $3, depending on the size of your rat. Mice, I think pinky mice started at about $1 each. Adult mice are about $5 each. So for us if we didn't breed rats and mice ourselves, then we'd be looking at a cost of anywhere between probably $500 or $600 a week is what we'd have to come up with.
Whoa.
$500 a week doesn't sound that bad, but that's
get another job.
But that's $2,000 a month.
Yeah.
That's $4,000 a year.
Sounds pretty bad to me.
Yeah, I was gonna
But
say.
also too, we know our rodents are clean. We know that we're not putting through any disease,
Right.
But that at the same time, that's also then I've also got to find the time to deal with that. And I suppose, I have a little bit of a mantra when it comes to reptile keeping, right? And I suppose it's a form of thinking called triangular thinking, right? So you've got 3 different points of the triangle, and each one of those points of the triangle allow you to do something, right? So the first point is cost, okay? The second point is ability. And the last point is time, right? Now, time and drive are interlinked, okay? So you can do anything if you can afford to do it and you have the ability to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have the ability to do it, you need to spend more time in learning how to do something. Or you need to pay somebody who knows how to do it for you. So that includes more cost. So then if you apply that to basically all of your workings, you can then apply that to whether you want to keep a new species or not. Do I have the ability to do it? If I don't have the ability, I need to teach myself. That's going to incur a cost. That cost is going to be both time and financial, right? If the cost benefit doesn't outweigh the time spent, then I'm not going to want to do it.
Mm-hmm.
If I want to do it, I don't want to waste my time going down that road in the first place, right? So you can apply that metric to anything that you keep, and it's something to actually encourage people to do before they get a new species. Work out whether or not you actually want to do it, work out whether or not you can do it, and work out whether or not you should do it.
You just bring them home, damn well I'll do it.
This reminds me a lot. Like, so right now I'm basically rebuilding a little cabin, my first home, and
yeah,
I've been talking to folks about building, and you know, there's this adage. It's like you've got cheap, good, and fast, and you can pick 2 out of 3.
Yeah.
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 You know, you can have it good and fast, and it will not be cheap. You can have it
Yeah.
cheap and good, but it won't be fast. You know,
Yeah.
and that really applies, I feel like, in the same way that you're speaking to here. That's just the way it goes.
Yeah. So the different metric is not fast, it's ability.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or not, right? And if you don't have that ability, there's ways and means that you can get that ability,
Right.
right? But there's cost involved in getting that ability. Now, whether that is financial or time is the one that you need to look at.
Mhm.
So, and it's something that's interesting, right? So you can change things around, right? So you keep a heap of euros, Phil, right? And so keeping arid desert species, if you want to keep stuff from cold, a cold, wet environment, you can do it. You can 100% do it.
Yeah.
But it might mean that you need a new building to do that.
Yeah, totally. You're speaking my language, man. I mean, this is
I had to bring euros into it somehow, mate. You'd gone half an hour without speaking about it. You hadn't mentioned euro or jiu-jitsu. I think you're going to have an aneurysm.
no.
So I thought I'd better bring it back to it at least.
No. I appreciate that, but the only reason I've been a little bit quiet is partially because I'm trying to do a little bit of different things with each conversation. I feel like I can really, really easily kind of dominate and overwhelm a conversation because I have a lot of energy. And so there are times when I think if I hold back a little bit, then I tend to get, I don't know, basically I'm just trying to work on my listening skills is kind of all I'm really trying to get at there.
As Ty says, we have 2 of these and 1 of these.
Yeah. That's actually really, really good. I've never heard that before. I'm going to use that.
I like that too.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
That.
But you're genuinely, when you're talking about having a needing a different space for what you do, I mean, that was the case with my Cuban giant anoles. They had to move home to the apartment because it's too much at the shop. It's so hot there. I had to I tried all kinds of stupid crap. I had, and I shit you not, I had a portable swamp cooler that I bought set in my shop, and let it blow on the anoles during the summertime because it just got way too hot. And then it was a fight between, okay, I'm blowing this swamp cooler on the anoles, so the anoles are staying cooler. They're a little more humid. Now I have to open the back door and the front door for a long time during the day because it's getting too humid for the euros, and it's like this combo. I'm like, my God, this balance is really challenging. And therefore, so much of what I do now is finding stuff that I can bring into the existing space as it is, and not have any need to mess with metrics or parameters in the shop, right? Sorry, I got a cough real quick. Sorry.
This is the exact reason why I'm building 2 or 3 little buildings for the herps at my new place on our land, because I have my Guyana shield species, the Spilotes, the Polycris, but then I also have, some temperate species that they just simply will not do well in the same room. There's no use even trying in my mind. So I'm just going to have separate buildings.
Yeah.
I think too, right? With reptiles, they're so, a lot of the species that do well in captivity are very adaptive, right? And so, those adaptive species are things like ball pythons, carpet pythons, blue skinks. All of those things have got a fairly wide-ranging ability to different environments, right? Now, they have parameters that they can't exceed, right?
Right.
A degradation of health in those animals, but they are fairly ubiquitous. I think some of the animals that people struggle to keep, the reason they struggle to keep them is because they try to keep them like a carpet python, or they try to keep like a ball python or whatever.
Yeah.
Not a hard species to keep. It's just a hard species to keep if you don't put it in the right parameters, don't give it the right parameters, right? And so that becomes an issue. I think there has been a change in the reptile scene, so to speak, over the last decade, I suppose, where you are starting to see people that are going, you know what? As much as I'd like to keep this animal, I'm not going to keep it because it doesn't really fit within what I want to do in our system. We don't need to stamp collect. We don't need to keep every single thing. And, we've made conscious decisions. We're not going to keep certain species that we like because it's too difficult to replicate those parameters where we live, right?
Right.
And this comes back to that thing. We know how to keep them, right? We know what it's going to cost to keep them, but it's too much effort to keep them that way, so we don't do it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Classic example for that are scrub pythons, right? So scrub pythons are a beautiful snake that we both love, right?
In the middle they are, yeah. That's a bit.
Yeah, they pull love you and they want to bite you.
Yeah.
But they're an animal, right? And we appreciate them. They're quite an intelligent python. They're an amazing animal to work with. But they get bloody massive, right? They're a big snake, right? The southern scrub pythons, King Horny, can get to over 20 feet long.
God damn, that's a huge animal.
So this is a big snake, right? But they're long bodied and they're not a heavy bodied snake.
Yeah.
But to have that animal and have it in an enclosure that's large enough, you're talking about a room size enclosure at the very least, if not larger.
Yeah.
So then the way you would do that where we are, the way we would try and keep something like that is we try to keep it outside. But then we're talking about then having to try and heat sections and stuff like that. And it's too difficult for us to give the animal what we think the animal needs for what we want to do. So we just choose not to keep it.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of people out there that need to reassess keeping some of these larger species of reptiles. We keep Parentes, the largest monitor lizards in Australia. But we have them in large outdoor enclosures that you can walk into.
I think on that though, when you're younger or when you first start to get into the hobby, you might go and buy something from someone, and then you see something that isn't being looked after to the best of its ability.
I'll take that on too.
Or the person's like, I don't fucking want this, just take this with it. You're like, okay. Or like so many times mates have gone, okay, so I went to buy this. I have walked home with this. I don't want it. And I don't have the room because it was, not being looked after. Well, you take it. And you're like, sure. So then you've got more animals that you didn't intend on keeping, and you're not just collecting, you're sort of doing it, a pity buy, or you're helping someone. And I think when you're younger, you do that because you've got a lot more energy, you've got a lot more time, and you do want to learn as much as you possibly can by keeping everything you can, I guess. But then as you sort of get older and you sit on the lounge and you don't want to get up after 10 o'clock because your day's over and that, you realize that you don't need to keep everything you can get your hands on.
Right.
Yeah, there's definitely a very familiar arc there, I think, in herpetoculture of just like the initial phase. It's just like trying all the flavors.
Yeah.
Like it's like discovering what your palate even is, and then those who stick with it long enough tend to pare down, and tend to find like the juice is actually in kind of more in specialization. I think about this a lot. There are dozens of species I would love to keep because I think they're amazing. Uromastics are among them, and it's also like
they're great.
they're not going to fit in super well here. They're not going to do well, and it's not like I love abronia lizards, and it's like I don't have a cloud forest room. If I did, great, but I'm not there right now, so it's better to just leave them to someone who does.
Well, and there's also you know, again, so you know, you said that I hadn't yet referred to jujitsu or uromastics. But here you go.
Here we go.
You know, one of the
Brace yourselves, people.
Yep, get ready. Hold on to your butts from as
Let's go for a roll.
yeah, let's go. So basically, so in martial arts, you have you know, sort of similar instead of, you know, the variations in personality or in time of life in which you might choose different specific herps to work with kind of resembles the same way it expresses itself in martial arts at certain ages and at certain times in your career. People get obsessed with, you know, the newest move on, you know, I saw this dude on YouTube do this thing where he went upside down and he flipped over, and then this dude, you know, also flipped over, and then he grabbed his neck and then he tapped, and it was, whoa, you know. And you know, you kind of go through all of this development where you want to know as much as possible, and you want to gain that novelty. Becomes this sort of you know, it's like it's a feedback loop. Novelty makes you want more novelty, and that just feeds it and feeds it. And eventually you kind of find an equilibrium where you know that you need to push outside your comfort zone enough to continue learning, but that doesn't always mean getting wild and crazy with something new. That might simply mean approaching the exact same position every single day, but just from a slightly different angle or a slightly different deficit. And the same thing happens in herpetoculture. It's like, you know, when for the last 10 years that I've been really taking Euros really seriously, there was a huge period of that time that was focused around, I want to make sure I get my hands on and try and breed every one of them, every single Euro species I can possibly manage, you know. And then the next thing you know, you've got Euromastix dispar maliensis, Euromastix dispar, Euromastix dispar flavofasciata, and you're like, all right, these are basically the same fucking Euro, you know. And I mean, they're obviously super different, and they all have their own individual quirks, but the realization as of late has been that if, by way of narrowing my focus more and saying, okay, instead of 14 species, I'm going to have 5, just 5, you know, and they, you know, they're sufficiently different from one another to keep me entertained and to feel like I have enough variety and kind of spice within just Euromastics. But also, you know, I feel like I know Ornata so well at this point, and you know, and there's a lot to be had in just like peeling back the layers of one animal, one damn thing over and over and over and over again. And I don't know, there can be something really beautiful in that. And you know, do you sort of like it's like the jack of all trades thing, right? Do you want to be a jack of all trades or a master of one, right? And I don't know. I mean, I don't even agree with that exact statement. I mean, I'm not convinced that one can't be a master of many things, but that's a different conversation. You know, but I really think the whole point, all I'm trying to really get at is just that there's a lot of ways you can get a lot out of herpetoculture. And now I'm rambling. Now I need to.
So how many species of Euromastics are
there? Currently I have 7. Yeah.
No, how many species are out there?
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. My bad. So depending on the current state of classification, it's going to range between 16 to 20, depending on the subspecies and the classification at any given point.
So have they done a detailed phylogeny on the genus?
Yeah, so I think Thomas Wilms has that in his book. That would be, but I don't know. I have to admit that as far as the most up-to-date classification and phylogeny, I couldn't say. I don't know.
Yeah. So I suppose that where I'm leading to with that, right, is that you've got a genus of agamids that have very little experience in, mind you. So we're speaking here from a complete outsider looking in.
Sure.
You've got 20 odd species that are found over a fair area of Saharan and Saharan Africa and Arabia.
Mhm.
That is wide ranging. There is going to be a shitload of habitat types there that you are going to have to try and replicate, right? And you said in the conversation you wanted to try and specialize in uromastics, but then you also wanted to try and keep and breed each one of the species of uromastics.
Right.
To do that, you're still going to have to be completely wide ranging, and you may be able to do that, but you may not be able to do that all at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
you might have to turn around and go, right, okay, I want to do this, but it might be a 20-year goal. And it might mean, right, okay, I'm going to keep Ornata and I'm going to keep some of these more common species initially for the first 5 or 10 years, but then you're going to have to knuckle down and try and find some of these other ones
Mm-hmm.
and remove some of these more common species from your collection to enable you to be able to have the facility that allows you to keep some of these different taxa, I suppose.
For sure.
Or you go the other way, which is sort of like Roy's saying, where you build another room. You might have to see if the shop next door is going to be available for you, mate, and
Yeah.
set that one up. Who knows?
Well, yeah, that's a good.
The problem is there's only one. The limitation.
Too,
The limitation here is actually that there's only one fill.
Yeah.
Just too few fills.
That's exactly right. I mean, if I could have like 3 of me, then I'd rent the whole business strip. I'd rent the whole thing and just be like, okay, in this one we're gonna have just Ornata. In this one we're gonna have Yemenensis. In this one we're gonna have Princeps and Thomasai. And then in this one we're gonna have Xenogama, and then just on and on down the line. But then eventually they'd have a cold one, and it'd be like, all right.
Or you just move to Morocco.
Oh God, no. I've thought about it. I've thought about moving to Arizona.
Have you been there? Have you herped it? Have you gone and seen them in the wild?
I have not yet, but believe me when I say that is tippy top on my because I feel
that'll be life changing for you, mate. I'm telling you. You see these things in the scrub, and it changes your.
It's going to change everything. It's going to change everything because there's been other stuff back. I used to keep collared lizards and chuckwallas and stuff like that. I have a couple of chucks now, but I would go see those guys in the wild, and you're right. It changes everything about the way you care for them, the way you set them up. It informs what you're doing in a way that you can't wrap your head around until you fucking go there.
Bearded dragons can be on sand.
What? No.
There's sand there. Really, I promise you.
Blasphemer.
No way, what do you know about bearded dragons?
Oh, wow. That's hilarious. No, I mean that's part of the goal for sure. I'm really lucky to have a fiance who would also like to see Uromastics in the wild. So we've discussed possibly. So the 2 obvious choices are Morocco and Oman. Right. Yeah. Because in Morocco, there's going to be more. It's probably just going to be a little bit easier to get around. It's probably going to be easier to find everything. You're going to see really big, beautiful ones. You might probably see them most of the year, whereas, and then you go to Oman, you could probably see them most of the year too. But the benefit is you can see 3 species, right? You can see Thomasai, Egyptian microlepis, and the true Bentai, Uromastyx bentai, all within the same place. So it's like, okay, maybe that's where I got to go. And or you do a 2-week trip and you spend a week in Oman and a week in Morocco. There you go. Exactly. But as I don't know, but vacations are not easy for me. It's very hard for me to leave the animals at any point in time. And which is also, this brings me to, you were talking about me renting out another shop, right? Like rent next door, because you might need to, whatever. I'm actually seeing if I can try to go the other direction. I'd actually kind of like to scale down, but just level up each individual space, because when I moved from my parents' home into my shop, I gave all the animals a lot more space. Everybody got more space. And I don't know, I just realized this immediate realization upon moving in, like, oh my God, I'm doing this all wrong. Like I was like, this is all incorrect. I can do this 10 times better. I really would love to set up. Basically the plan now is it's like, all right, if I can scale down and just give every single Ornata like a 6x6x6 and actually have legitimate vertical space. I want to see what that changes. I mean, I want to be able to give my Egyptians so they each have an 8.5 by 5 foot by 5 foot pen, and I want to give each of them double that, you know, because it's just not enough. They're huge. They're fucking huge lizards, you know. And I feel like there has got to be a way to make something like that happen, because I'm getting to this point where I'm in my career where I'm not comfortable with the idea of, in order to make more money, I have to stack more lizards. You know, I'm just like, I don't want to do that. I don't want to go that route. I mean, it's great, and I understand it's a logical way for a lot of people to go, but I'm just at this point where I just don't think that's what I want. I don't know. I'd rather be able to have 25% fewer animals, but feel more comfortable taking a 2-week trip to Morocco and Oman. You know, I mean,
so realistically though, you've already answered it yourself. You've already answered it. You already know where you've got to go.
Yep.
And that you've got to have 25% less animals than what you've got right now.
Yep.
He said it. You've already convinced yourself in this.
Yeah.
You're work out some arbitrary way that you can actually make that decision to sell that animal.
So we've been together nearly 20 years,
Yeah.
somewhere around that.
Yeah.
And this year was the first holiday we took together. We did one in Melbourne to see a mate, and Germany. That was the first holidays we've had together because of the animals. Yeah.
Right. Wow. That's amazing.
It's just not fair to ask someone to come round with the amount of animals we have.
Right. Can you come and look after this taipan for us, you know?
Right, exactly. I mean,
what we're asking people to do is a whole nother level of fucking shitstorm.
Yeah. It's not somebody just coming in to put food in the cat bowl. You know what I mean? It's not that simple. It's such a dynamic thing to have to do. And I feel like, especially with the kinds of animals that I keep, if I just added in a little bit more automation in terms of like the lighting systems and you know, not even feeding. I mean, I don't mean literally automate feeding, but systematize it in a more effective way. It'd be a lot easier for me to go away, you know?
But did you get into reptile keeping to keep reptiles, or did you get into reptile keeping to keep a process?
To keep a process, yeah, definitely to keep reptiles for sure. Yeah, of course.
So this is the thing, right? And look, I'm process driven, right? So
Thinking, yeah, good on you, Mr. Spreadsheet.
I'm about as process driven as it comes, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I've heard people talk about it in the past, and then they sit there and go, yeah, I've put all this automation in, but then they don't actually get to experience their animals. They don't experience their animals because they don't have to go and spray them. They don't have to go and check temperatures because their phone beeps at them. And literally, like I looked across at my phone before, right? And I've got 2 temperature sensors in the room. One, I've got a warning sensor. So as soon as it hits 28 degrees in the room, I get a warning. So it sends across a message to my phone to say, hey, it's 28 degrees in the room.
Yeah.
It'll send that message every time that it hits 28. Now I should see it drop on and off, on and off, on and off. And I'll get messages through the day. If I get the next one, then there's something that's going on and the temperature's got too high in the room.
Right.
But I'm not going down to check that everything's okay because I just got a message on my phone to say that everything's fine.
Right.
Yeah.
Now relying on a process.
Right.
Old me would go down there, right, before I had that system in there. Old me would go in and go and, oh yeah, actually it feels okay in here. It doesn't feel too warm. It doesn't feel too cool. Right?
Yeah.
So because I've got a process, I'm spending less time with the animals that I love.
Right. So you're again, I couldn't agree with you. I totally hear what you're saying. I feel as though, because I do a lot of that as it is. Like I'm sure I've mentioned on either on past shows or in past conversations. I can't remember which because it's all conversations, right? But like, you know, there are so many things that I insist on doing myself with the animals. I insist on it. I have a young kid who him and his dad trained jujitsu with me at my last academy. And when his kid got old enough, they asked if I could give him a job helping me out of the shop. And I'm like, yeah, that's fine. I could use help. and he's worked, this is his third summer working for me, and his third summer, and I just let him start cleaning the fucking cages. Like, I just, in the third year, that's when I said, okay, now you know enough. And then after 3 years, he still put a rock on a Xenogama. You know?
Ooh.
And yeah, I mean, it was look, it was an accident. It wasn't his fault.
Totally. Totally.
I mean, it was his fault, but he didn't know, right? He's learning.
Yeah.
And that was after 3 years. So that didn't help me in my confidence that I could get anybody else to help me out with my animals, right? I trust the one person I trust more than anybody else with my Uromastyx is my mother. She's collected more Uromastyx eggs because I've been offered it
That's awesome.
than anyone else in the United States. I promise you that. I promise you that. And it's like, it's hilarious, right? Because it's, but she's also getting older. She's at an age where I can't ask that of her anymore, especially with animals like Pork Chop, my big Egyptian, because that animal could cause real damage to anybody. I mean, he's a danger. He's a huge Egyptian. He's a big Euro. Yeah, okay. He's not a monitor lizard. I had one guy kind of harass me a little. I put up a video where I was like, you just need to know, here's like what you need to know about Egyptians before you buy one, right? And I was like I was showing him off, and I was like, look, Pork Chop's a dangerous lizard. And this guy got on there and was like, whatever, that's not a tegu, it's not a monitor, it's not going to do that. I'm like, okay, well, have you been bit by one before? Well, no. It's like, well, yeah, well then fuck off. Like, he could do real damage. It's a huge lizard with a beak and a giant club tail with spikes in it, bro. You think he can't do damage? Are you crazy? Who cares if it's not a bunch of knives? Sorry, okay, speaking of tangents, but I think
you care if you get bitten by it.
Oh, I care.
Oh, yeah.
Fucking right.
I don't think you'd sit there and go, well, I'll just let that Egyptian bite me.
Yeah, no, dude. He's
That's the reality, right?
He's latched onto me twice, and both times on the same finger. Well, actually, the same hand, different finger. These two fingers. Never again, man. I was so lucky that he didn't draw blood. He just sat there holding on to my finger, hissing at me, just looking at me like, well, I could really take your finger off right now. I mean, I don't think he could actually sever the whole finger, but I mean, actually, I don't know. Maybe he could. Fuck, I have no idea.
Who knows?
They bite, and when they hold on, I imagine it's fairly similar to some of the larger skinks.
Yeah.
When they hold on, and like I've got a bent finger from one of them as well, right? From a large skink. And yeah, I'm not sticking my finger in its mouth.
No way.
I don't think I'd call it dangerous, but at the same time, it's a relative term, isn't it? So
yeah. Well, yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, it's look. I don't think I'd call it dangerous, but it's certainly not something that I'm going to stick my finger in its mouth either.
Yeah.
If I can avoid it, I'm going to avoid the bite.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean,
I've got scars from lizards as well that we don't want. So that's what it is.
Yeah, and I totally forgot where I was going with my rambling. I kind of have tattoo brain.
You're talking about how willing you are to allow other people to work with your animals.
Oh yeah. So
ultimately, though, honestly, you're probably the same as us. You know that you have competent mates.
Yeah.
And it's not you doing it. Like, what if it's
no
disrespect to any of your mates or anything like that. It's just, and we've got older animals too. some of our animals are, we've got one.
We've got a python that's over 4 years old.
Right.
Yeah.
Holy smokes. Yeah. Well, and it also is sort of one of those things where you, to a certain extent, you've almost trained yourself to believe that the margin for error is very, very narrow. You think, if you do this one thing just a little bit wrong, things could go south. And I mean, it really could, like if I left during the summertime and I've got a whole small room full of babies, there's two big things that can happen. One is overheating, easy to do when you've got a million halogens, right? And it's got to be scorching hot in the room. There's a lot of mitigation that goes on during the summer that nobody sees. And it's not easy to automate. I shut off individual lights all day in a rotation through the whole fucking room. That way, no one is without light for any extended period of time, but it manages the overall temperature. You know what I mean? It's the only way to even make it function. Rheostats and thermostats just are not dependable, at least for what my setup anyway. And Oh yeah. And then the other thing is, feeding. If I could tell them, drop in some greens for these babies, who knows how they're going to deliver it to them. If I say put one whole strip of lettuce in per cage of babies, let them chew it down to the stem, then take the stem out and put another one in. Okay, maybe they might do that, but if they leave the stem in too long, there's going to be that one goddamn Euro that tries to eat the whole stem and chokes to death, because it happens. There's things you have to do to kind of mitigate these things, and you really convince yourself that I couldn't leave it to anybody. But then again, then you'll go away, then you'll actually finally force yourself to go. Like, your fiance will be like, hey, we gotta get away for a weekend or a week, and I'll be like, all right, fine. Then I'll actually go away for a week, and I'll come back and everything looks better than before I left, and I'm like, shit, I should have left a long time ago. Hell, I don't know how to make any of this work anymore. It's crazy.
They need a break from that mug, Phil. They need a break from that mug, man.
I think too, right, that the other side of it is that, there's different levels of different things too, right? So like you were saying before, Phil, about, we work in fine lines, and something can go pear-shaped or something can go wrong. Well, fear of going wrong for us is ultimately somebody getting a bite, right? So, you having something go wrong, you might lose the life of an animal. We have something go wrong and we might lose our life.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So there is a much higher level, I suppose, of requirement to make sure that what we do is safe. And so putting ourselves in a position that we can work with the animal in a safe manner is a process in itself, right? Going in and doing a self-assessment before you even walk into the room to determine whether or not I'm fit to work with these animals in the first place. Right? How you actually go into the room to ensure that that something hasn't gone wrong and there hasn't been human error and you've left an enclosure unlocked or something like that. And making sure that these things are okay. Now, touch wood, in the 26 years we've been keeping animals, we haven't had any of those sorts of things go wrong. But at the same time, you are working with animals, and there is always going to be a factor there. And the one thing that we've learned, I suppose, over the years that we've been keeping reptiles is to expect the unexpected. An animal can always do more than what you think it can do. You think that snake can only strike a distance of 30 centimeters. Well, when it strikes 45 centimeters and you sit there and are completely shocked by it all, right? That's where you've gone, oh, well, okay, my 30 centimeters is out. And I had that when I first worked with Ingram's brown snakes, and these are a large, dangerously venomous species that are fairly unusual, and there's not a hell of a lot of them around. And the first one I ever worked with, I assumed it would be fairly similar to working with Pseudonaia textilis, the Easter brown snake. What I learned is that Ingram's brown snakes can strike about 15% further and higher than what textilis typically strike as well. So the same size animal, it strikes just that little bit further and a little bit higher. And that put me in a couple of uncomfortable positions where I was a lot closer to that animal than I expected to be. And it wasn't until I sort of learned how to work with those animals to work my distances, right? And it's the same thing with anything that we work with. Every time we work with a new species, work with a new locality, we find different
you think you're getting
parameters.
older and you get tired faster or whatnot, work with a new species, you're like, yeah, no, I can still move.
Yeah. And it depends too, right? Like, you get certain animals that tend to behave themselves in a good way, and you get individuals that tend to work fairly well. And then you have that animal's having a bad scale day, so to speak. And yeah, you open the enclosure and this snake comes out full guns blazing and striking at your face.
I like bad scale day.
Yeah, I like that as well.
Yeah.
I feel like this is a really good, this question around process, like are you into it for the process or are you into it for the reptiles? I feel like I'm also someone who's really, really process oriented. You know, I mean, I have a 52-week calendar with, you know, this is my feeding schedule. This is my lighting, adjusting my lighting. So it's like perfectly matching the arc of where these animals are from. And
Nerd. I'm just kidding.
yeah, I mean, we're talking top tier nerd right here. And but at the same time, one of my favorite things, like I really believe that too much efficiency kills the sacred. And there's a way in which it's like sacred time for me to just go into the reptile room and just flow, you know. Okay, that one looks like it could use a little bit of food, and like I have my set routines, right, and my rhythms, and I also have time built in so that I can deviate from that, because I think that provides both enrichment and novelty for the animals, but it's also just good for me and my spirit to do that. And you know, this is why I don't keep venomous, you know, because the reality is that that flow time that I'm having leaves space for things to go wrong. And like I'm thinking about, like, you know, you're referencing like a bad scale day, and you know, this is a perfect example working with the spilotes, you know, the sulfurious. There's just one day where I'm like, I'm just in that state and I'm like, oh, I should change this water. I go in and, you know, my green female sulfurious she's just hanging out, and, you know, standard day, I could go in, move the water bowl. She doesn't move at all. She doesn't care that I'm there. And I go and change the water, put it back. Nothing happens. This day, for whatever reason, I touch the water bowl. I like look over to the side, something distracts me, and bam, she just nails me on the hand. And I'm like, you know, that's how it happens right there. You know, like I totally caught me by surprise. Like, just totally aberrant behavior. And it hasn't happened again since then. It was just a bad day. But with a taipan or an Ingram's brown, that's a much worse day for me.
Probably a very short day.
Yeah.
It's a bad day for me too. Get the
He
short.
has
Yeah.
tone to the word fuck, where I know he's been bitten. Makes your blood run cold, and then I'm like, yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, it is what it is. You know, touch wood, I haven't been bitten for
Don't
a
say this out
long
loud.
time. No, it's all right. I don't believe in superstition like that.
I do.
So
touch wood for Ty's sake, everyone.
right, there we go. Right, so it's all happened.
You're driving yourself to the hospital,
yeah,
sunshine.
And look, the reality of it is, right, is that you work with these animals in a certain way, and you do that self-assessment before you go into it. And you need to ask yourself these questions and go, you know what? Okay, so today I'm not into it. I didn't sleep well last night or whatever. It's also changed the way that I'll behave socially as well, right? I won't tend to drink when I'm going out to a pub, something like that, because there's every chance that I'm going to have to work with something dangerously venomous when I go. So I don't want to have anything in my system that could have an adverse reaction when I'm working with venomous snakes. Now, some people are like, oh, well, it doesn't matter, the chances are, or whatever. Well, I don't want to take that risk. And it's a part of being a responsible venomous keeper is to make those assessments and conduct those assessments on yourself.
My idea of responsibility is he's sober. Frank.
You know, it's actually kind of an interesting topic too, because, you know, I've noticed that if I get, say the first time I ever got Uromastix thomasi, right? Super rare, uncommon, difficult to find anywhere, no less here in the States. And I remember when I got them, I started treating everything I do with a little bit more seriousness, you know, like their cage and enclosure and setup and routine all got like an elevated level of care. And then that spilled over into the other animals, you know, and I could imagine keeping venomous, which I mean, for sure, like not a day goes by when I don't fantasize about it to a certain extent, even though it's not in the cards here for me in Colorado. It's not legal for me to keep even rear fanged stuff. I can't keep hognose snakes for Christ's sake, but I fantasize about it because there are so many beautiful animals that I would love to learn about and I'd love to have a relationship with in some way, right? But you know, even with the knowledge that I've been bitten by an Egyptian Euromastix, it'd be very likely that if I didn't really pay the fuck attention, I'd get bit by something, and I don't want that. But what I'm trying to get at is that I'm fascinated by the idea that of what each new project could possibly bring to the way that I do the rest of what I do. You know, how would keeping venomous inform my care, my protocols, my practice in general? I mean, maybe that's a question for you guys. Like what, you know, like have you been keeping venomous since you started keeping reptiles? And if not, how did you get started down that path? What was it that was like, all right, I think this is for me. Like, this is what I want to mess with.
I suppose it's interesting. Ty can speak to her, but I'll speak to myself. I started catching venomous snakes before I was keeping reptiles, right? So, you know, I started catching them as a real young kid, catch them, father would release them, etc., etc. Long story short, that's basically how I got into venomous, and I always work with venomous snakes. When I met Ty wasn't keeping venomous, right? So Ty's way of dealing with animals was different to the way that I would deal with animals. And we had a conversation right at the start about how you go into a snake enclosure and how you approach a snake enclosure. Because the way I approach a snake enclosure is exactly the same, regardless of what species in it, right? You go into autopilot, right? Okay, you go into servicing an enclosure. You're mindful of what you're doing, but you're still in somewhat of a muscle memory type situation where you're okay. I'm going to pull the water bowl out. I'm going to scrub the water bowl. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Do this. With venomous snakes, it's slightly different. First thing you do with venomous snakes is you remove the snake from the enclosure. And so I have this particular mindset. Now, Ty had a slightly different idea, right? And she'll speak to that now, I suppose, because it was quite a difference of opinion.
Look on his face. So having young kids, obviously, for me, Vens was something that were going to come a lot later. They came with Scott. For me, it didn't matter. Like, I only had pie. I didn't have anything venomous. So if it was hanging off the end of my finger, well, so be it. You know what I mean? Like, it wasn't venomous. It wasn't going to kill me. Oh, short of a monitor. And first time he saw that, he was horrified. And he's like, open every tub like it's venomous. Open every enclosure like it's venomous. And started doing that. And I got to admit, down the track, I got diagnosed with Sjogren's, which is an autoimmune disease. So I flare up something shocking from a snake bite. So like a python bite, it just gets a huge rash, itchy as hell. It doesn't go away for hours and hours and hours.
Wow.
Up, etc., etc. So I'm sort of glad that I got into that mindset earlier, because if I can avoid a python bite, I will. Purely because it's just a pain in the ass for hours afterwards. But if it hadn't have been for the Vens early on, I probably would still be like, oh, it's biting me. It'll learn to stop sooner or later and just let it go.
Yeah.
That's
So I suppose the difference is that, you know, I don't care what it is. I always open up every enclosure like it's venomous.
Yeah.
There has been the odd time that we've moved stuff around and one of us has forgotten to change the tag.
Yeah.
And bad. I put headphones on or music up real loud and just go when I start cleaning and the potter.
And bounce around the room like.
The odd time where I pick something up and gone, oh, fuck, that's not a children's python. You didn't change the fucking tag.
Oh, no.
But yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah. Wow. That's fascinating. That's very interesting. Yeah, because
interesting probably wasn't the word I was using at the time.
no, not that. I mean, not that.
No, I know. But yeah,
but I suppose too, right? That comes back. We keep flirting around this process thing as well, right? So it's the way that I walk around the room and the way that the animals are set up in the room depends on the species it is, and depends on the general level of behavior of that particular individual, right? So I've got venomous snakes that are in enclosures that are in a position that are less than ideal to deal with because of the space constraints in the room. But I've got those species in enclosures that are, I've done a risk assessment on those, and those animals are in a position where if I had to put something up there, this isn't that bad to have in that particular enclosure, right? So if I'm working off a ladder, I'm less mobile than if I'm working on the ground, right? So the animals that have got more ability or are more inclined to cause me harm, they're sitting in enclosures that are easier for me to manage. So, you know, you don't want to be working on a ladder and then have a 6-foot taipan coming out at your face when you open the enclosure.
Right.
Yeah, that sounds kind of scary.
Right. It's not a look.
Cool.
Right.
A little scary.
What's that?
Just a little, just a little bit scary. There's a little scary. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not a good look, right? And that's sort of where it comes back to working with venomous animals in a professional way. You do these, you work out whether or not this is the best way to deal with it, right? And so likewise, the same thing in the way we keep all of our animals, right? You don't want to have an animal that's fast moving, that is high stress, that is a pain in the ass to deal with, in a position, in an enclosure that is hard for you to get in and out of.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So you're going to tend to put that at somewhere between hip and shoulder height, where you've got good visibility, where it's nice and easy to get in and out of the enclosure.
Where's hip and shoulder?
Right.
A lot shorter than he is.
Yeah. But you're going to choose your thing. You're going to choose your position wisely for your animals, right?
Yeah.
Same time too, right? You've also got animals that like to be up higher as well. You know, a lot of boreal snakes like to be higher in the room. Yeah. So if you've got an arboreal species that you're struggling with, take it off the enclosure, off the bottom level, and put it right up the top.
Yeah.
And see how much better that animal feels, because when it walks into the room, it's actually above the monkey that's walked into the room.
Right.
Right. Animals do tend to feel safer.
Yeah.
Same with you know, animals that you keep, you know, the skinks and stuff like that we used to keep inside. The minute that we put them outside, their behaviors became like wild lizards. Right. Now, there's probably a number of different things there that are causing that. But one of the things is that they're less used to seeing people, right? Because you're not walking past their enclosures constantly and all the rest of it. So the animals aren't as used to seeing people. But then there's also impacts from the way that their brains are working, right? So now, instead of being subject to lighting that impacts on what we think is their visual spectrum, they're now dealing with they're dealing with actual sunlight. And so they're getting UVA, UVB, IR, C, B, and A, as well as your visible spectrum, right? So they're getting different types of spectra that they don't usually get in captivity. We say that we're giving full spectrum lighting in captivity. Well, are we really giving them full spectrum lighting? No, we're giving them lighting between each light is going to provide a spectral response.
Yeah.
What the visible spectrum for each one of our reptiles is, we don't really know. We know that some can see in the IRC. We know that some can see in, IRA, I should say. We know that some can see in UVA, right? Their spectral response, their visual spectra is larger than what we've got. Okay. But we're giving them lights that, you know, people are putting in things like 6,500 Kelvin, daylight, true daylight colored shoes. We don't know how that actually is impacting on those animals. Right. We don't know their color representation is the same as what we have, right? So if you've got an animal that is seeing in the UVA spectrum, or you've got an animal that's seeing in the the IRA spectrum, right, and you're not providing IRA or you're not providing UVA, then that animal is not getting the same lighting, not getting the same spectral response,
Right.
and that impact on their behaviors. Right.
I feel this speaks so much to another trend in some of the conversations we've had so far on the show. So, for example, Philippe de Vogely was talking about how when you start practicing herpetoculture, it's a way of encountering another kind of consciousness, like another kind of awareness. And I feel like what you just described, just the fact that these animals may have, or well, obviously they all do, but in varying degrees have drastically different visual systems than we do, with different perception mechanisms than we do. That should tell that fact alone should be indicative of like, you have to think outside all of your conceptions about what may or may not be good or fun or enjoyable for the animal at any given point in time, because it's like they're thinking about things in such a completely different way from you. I mean, at least within reason anyway. I don't know. It's just I didn't mean to derail that particular thing, but that just struck me as like somehow important to highlight.
I also feel that kind of reaffirms the like the merit of a naturalistic replication in herpetoculture. It's something that Dr. Kelsey Chapman, a guest we had very recently, said basically it's like we should be seeking to provide natural replication unless we can prove that something else is better.
So that's an interesting way, right? So people, and I've seen people use this response many times. Oh, it's breeding. It means it's happy.
Yeah.
What a load of shit.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Totally.
The animal has got a predisposition. It has got a innate drive to reproduce. So you're going to use that as a metric to say that this animal is happy, that it's going to follow what it's meant to do. Like, fuck off. That's just rubbish.
Right.
If we are it is a metric to say that we're keeping him to a point that allows the animal to function correctly. But that's like the lowest common denominator.
Yeah,
right?
it sounds like a pretty low bar to clear.
100%. Right? So I suppose that's one point to think. The other thing to keep in mind is that we're going to go a network bandwidth thing going at the moment, so I'm not quite sure how it's going. But anyway,
That's good.
That's all
the
good.
other thing to keep in mind is that all of these animals that we keep, we should be trying to do the best we can. Right? Now, if we use UVB as an example for snakes, right? We see all these people say you don't need to provide UVB for snakes. Well, I don't know if that's the case, right? Because if you look at there is a few studies out there. There was an interesting one by Rossano 2013, I think it is from memory. Looked at a bone densities in corn snakes, right? So they took half the clutch of 3 clutches of corn snakes. They gave them the same diet, but they provided half the animals from each of the clutches with UVB, right? Did bone density scans 6 months and 12 months later, right? The animals that were given UVB had somewhere between 12 and 25 times the bone density of the animals that didn't get UVB.
Whoa.
They had the same fucking diet, but they effectively metabolized the UVB, right, into calcium, dihydroxide calcium, the way it should actually be.
Wow.
Right?
Wow.
That's remarkable.
So, here's an animal that, and we turn around and everyone says, oh, not all snakes bask. Just about every snake species that I've ever seen basks. They might be, they're not necessarily thygothermic. They may not necessarily be heliothermic, but they have some way that they want to elevate their body temperature for the most part.
Right.
Right. And so, you know, if they are moving around in the environment and they are getting some levels of UV exposure, which is helping them metabolize vitamin D3, then there is no reason why we shouldn't be at least providing some exposure to UV, right? Now, that's not to say that we get a UV lamp and just blast the whole enclosure with UV either, right? We should be providing UV in a gradient, right?
Exactly.
So that means that when we're providing our light, we have a way that the animals can get away from it and they can make an active choice as to whether they're exposed to the UV light or not. And that, you know, sort of linear fluorescent tubes seem to be a better alternative currently than LED UV, right? Because LED UV runs in very tight bandwidths at the moment. So it's quite a very short bandwidth of light that they release the vitamin UVB in, right? Whereas the fluorescent tubes do provide a greater range of UV, all right? But the fact that it's a tube that runs across the whole enclosure means that the animal is able to regulate and change its position and temperature, but also change its position in regards to how much UV output it gets. You've got means of shading parts of the enclosure so that animal can then sit underneath a branch or anything like that. That animal is going to regulate its UV exposure as well. And we've noted that some species will actively seek out UV light as opposed to heat, right?
Oh,
so
yeah.
UV basking, right? We've got windows in the roof of our herp room building, and this is sort of where it comes back to this visual spectra thing, where we'll see snakes actively seek out sunlight.
Sun changes throughout the
As
day.
the sun,
they move around.
as the sun comes out and it hits the enclosure, they'll go and curl up off the heat in the sun.
Yeah.
Or you get a rainy day and they will go where it should be because it has come that way for ever since they've been in there. So they know. Yeah.
That's awesome.
So, you know, and that's, I suppose, having that ability. So when we designed our snake building, these are things that we wanted to do. We know animals are impacted by moon phases, right? So we wanted to make sure that we had translucent windows on the roof, transparent windows on the roof rather than translucent, because we wanted the moon to actually play a factor on the light schedule within our building, right? Because if you go a full moon, you can see, right? And so can predators see that you tend to have a reduced activity period in reptiles on a full moon versus a new moon where it's completely dark. And we actually seen the moon impact on the animals in their enclosures, where we'll see greater periods of activity on the new moon in our herp building. The other thing that we're also willing to do is we're willing to look at different lights and things like that. We picked up some products from Fluval, which are mainly used in the aquarium industry, that have lighting functions that can simulate your wind up and start down in regards to your color temperature. But then also got the ability to simulate cloudy days. They've got the ability to simulate rainstorms, thunderstorms, hence thunderstorms versus low rain thunderstorms. And so they can be driven off your phone, right? So this is where we can use a process that we can change things in our systems to make them work for us. So there's a thunderstorm going outside. We've got a drop in pressure outside, which is, you know, changing pressures, air pressures are incredibly difficult to try and replicate in captivity. So you've almost got to work with the air pressures that you've got. Using a change in barometric pressure that comes before a thunderstorm, and then being able to replicate the thunderstorm in your building at the same time by having the flashes of simulated flashes of sparks of lightning with these lights, it works out really, really well. Now, added to that, as Ty was saying, And here you are, you've got this tropical thunderstorm that is occurring inside your snake building at the same time as what's happening outside.
Which can spur on mating and
yeah, which can cause a physiological response where it's actually causing a hormone to start being produced in the animals, which then causes a drive for either ovulation or sperm or any of those things to sort of start happening. So that's all important as well. Yeah,
now I feel like it comes across like
now.
we're like, oh, let's go make a storm and watch the animals.
I love this stuff.
No, this is awesome. So something I'm curious to ask about also then is, are there other ways in your keeping practices where you're adding, say, positive stress, in the sense that, yeah, so like one way that I do it here is I intentionally will have the uromastics fast or be underfed to a certain extent for short periods of time, obviously, right? Short stretches of time. But like, you know, so many of the animals, if I put a fresh pile of wet greens inside the cage every day, they're going to eat it every day, and they're going to get fat, and they're going to get too much or too whatever, everything, you know, the whole kit and caboodle, right?
Mhm.
And so there's a lot of ways where I'm trying to intentionally give them certain kinds of stress. So for example, another example is Pork Chop, my male Egyptian. He loves to chase me. He just loves to run up on me and puff up and do his little head bobs and be like, hey, well, get out of my place, man. You know, he loves it, but I use it as a means of exercising him. Right. So I'll either tap around the cage, or I have a stick that has a cat scooper on it that I use to scoop out his shit, because if I get in there, he tries to kill me. And so I'll tap that around the cage, and he just comes tearing after it, and I'll have him hit laps going around his enclosure just to get him to burn some calories and use some muscle, you know? So are there ways that that you know, because if it's that's what I like about what you're talking about, is you're going to these really excellent lengths to give more opportunity of various kinds to your animals. So
behavioral enrichment, I suppose, is something that we use a bit. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll do musical hides, which is always an interesting one.
We played music, and I'm like, when did we do that?
So musical hides are a good one. So we'll take a hide out of one enclosure and take it from one enclosure and put it in another one, right? So we'll take, and so it's different smell.
You mean without disinfecting it a million times with bleach? My
Correct.
goodness. Oh, you know,
Correct.
Sounds like you keep a bearded dragon on sand.
We're gonna have to edit this out. I don't want to be this controversial.
Yeah, no way.
Charlie.
Yeah. So musical enclosures, musical hides, and shed skins, right? So we'll take a shed skin from one enclosure and take one from and put it in with something completely different, right? So we'll take a shed skin from a tiger snake and put it in with a death adder, right? And we found that if we put like a shed skin from a death adder and with a mulga snake, the mulga snake will eat the skin, right? They're Ophiophagous, you know, they're Ophiophagous species, right? They like eating other snakes, so it's a food thing, right?
Cool.
It's not necessarily the end of the world, though. That's some different enrichment for that snake.
Absolutely, right? Yeah.
They get anything out of it, but hey, if it breaks its day up, then you know, we don't really know the intelligent levels of these animals, right? So we allow them to interact with their environment, and we want to do things that allows them to have something a little bit different in their day. And so this is an easy way that we can do that, right? People, if you take a branch, right, and it's always interesting to do this, right? And I challenge people to do this, and I'm actually going to challenge both of you guys to do this, is get a branch from outside and put it inside the enclosure of one of your animals that tends to sit in that enclosure and that's sat in that enclosure for a long time. Get a new branch and put a new branch in that enclosure and see what the animals do. Often you'll see the animals go over, they'll go and check it out. They'll go and lick it. In the case of a Uromastix, it's going to go over, it's going to lick it, it's going to taste it, it's going to smell it, right? That's giving something, it's breaking up that animal's day, right? you can then take that same branch, right, that you just had in there with, let's, you know, you might have it in with Thomasai, right? Take it out of the Thomasai enclosure and then break it up and put it in a Xenogama enclosure.
Yeah.
And take some of the soil from the Xenogama enclosure and stick it in with the Thomasai.
Yeah.
Right. And if there's a little bit of fecal matter on it, that doesn't matter. Right. Get that experience and let it smell different things and see how the animals react. You can do that to a point. Right now, you've got to do these things in little bites of that cherry. You don't want to turn around and go, I'm going to get everything from this enclosure and stick it in this one.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's going to cause an undue level of stress. But a little bit of stress is good for the animal's mind.
Absolutely. I do similar things here. I don't do the musical hides, but I definitely take stones from one cage to another. Right. Yeah. So primary, you know, even if it's just like some erroneous stone that doesn't really contribute to the entire setup, I'll take it from one enclosure and put it in another. I'll take animals out and I'll swap cages. So like I do that. I've done that with my Egyptians where they're in 2 pens right next to each other. Yeah. And I'll just take and just cross them over just for an hour to let them explore. And obviously that's a little extreme too, because Pork Chop goes bananas. I mean, he goes insane. Obviously, he's just like, where's she at, dude? I know she's here. Let's go. And then she's usually pretty cool about it. She takes it pretty calmly and just kind of laps his enclosure, looking around. And it's fun to see him kind of work out what's going on and work out where they're at now and figure out, okay, you see them orient themselves, right? You see them prioritize, like, what am I going to look for first? Am I going to find a new hide first? Am I going to find some shelter first so I know where to go if things get weird? Or am I going to, you know, they even have a totally different posture. When they walk up to something, they kind of have like a raised up, like do I need to fucking fight this thing? I don't know.
So why are they raised up, right? They're, in my mind, the reason they're raised up is they're trying to bring themselves up so they can see any perceived threats.
Yeah.
If their eye level is down, right, they're not going to perceive a threat. If they are a little bit higher, they're going to see threats coming towards them. And so it's these sorts of things that we're talking about.
Yeah.
You know, elevating our keeping is an important thing. But you don't want to change everything to the detriment of the animal either, right? That's right. And the fine balance that you need to try and find. So, you know, we never change everything holistically. We always start off, we go, okay, let's try this with one and see how that's reactive, right? So one thing that we did is we put PVC tubes in one enclosure initially, or 2 enclosures initially, with some rough scale pythons and a couple other bits and pieces. Ty was like, let's put these hides in these enclosures and see what happens. And I ended up cutting too many, so I had a couple of spares, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to drop them in with I think we put it in with taipans or something like that. Red bellies it was, that's right. And so we put it in with these red bellies, and these red bellies that are terrestrial snakes use these hides. And we're like, they're off the ground. What are you doing? You shouldn't be doing this. And we're like, all right, well, bugger it. Let's try this, and let's put this into a whole heap of enclosures.
Yeah.
And even if it's just enough to get the animal to use some of its muscles and climb position, right, and sit in a different position to where it usually sits, this is a benefit. It's a benefit. Yeah.
We had a northern blue tongue in there in one of those enclosures. He got a bit of scale rot from a lot of rain here out in the pits. And these are what, 20-25 centimeters off the ground. You go in there between 9:30 and 11 and you catch the blue tongue climbing up and sitting in this piece of PVC piping off the ground.
Whoa.
Yeah.
You're like, I don't even know how it got in there the first time. I looked at it, I go, how the hell did it get in there?
He's like, did you put that in? He does that.
That's hilarious. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this is so these are things that you can use, right? And you know, you can clean them easy enough if you want. You can have a sterile enclosure and all the rest of it. There's a difference between having an enclosure that's clean and having an enclosure that's sterile. Right? I believe in having clean enclosures. I don't believe in having sterile enclosures.
Totally, dude. Oh man.
Right.
Well said.
There's a huge difference between the two, and it's the same thing, right? where people talk about bioactive enclosures and naturalistic enclosures. I hate the term bioactive, right? Because bioactivity is such a hard level to reach, right? For an animal to be in a bioactive enclosure, basically that enclosure needs to be able to consume all of the waste for the animals that are sitting within it, right? Most people that have what they call bioactive enclosures aren't actually bioactive, they're naturalistic.
Right.
They're removing elements from that enclosure, all right, to try and keep it. And honestly, that's what we should be doing, right? So we've got snakes in naturalistic enclosures. They're not bioactive, simply because of the size of the enclosure for the size of the inhabitant, right?
They shit a lot.
Yeah, oh, exactly, right. But at the same time, we didn't also put the animals straight in either.
No.
Right? The animals could go in there. They looked like they could go in there, but we wanted 3 months to 6 months to go by before we would move the animals into those enclosures for it to allow the soil to get some structure to it, to allow the bacteria in the soil to start actually getting to the point where it needed to be. To make sure the bugs were doing what it needed to do, make sure we had some leaf litter cycling through it. And it's worked really well so far. And we're probably going to shift more animals into an enclosure style like that. But we're not going to do it all at once either.
Yeah, there's definitely something to be said for I don't know, I feel like there's this level of experimentation that it's so interesting because you talk about being so process oriented. It's so intriguing to me that adherence to process doesn't stifle your ability to get creative with your guys' process, I mean, it's like sometimes I feel like I'm not process oriented enough. I tend to be a little bit fly by the seat of my pants to a certain.
Nothing wrong with that.
But at the same time,
but part of a good process has a part of reflection, review, right? And that's that point is where you enact change within your process. The process should start at the planning phase. It shouldn't be during the actual act. The act is only part of the process.
Too much process though, and it becomes short, or it doesn't become something enjoyable.
It has to be an adaptive management. That's something I talk about a lot. I think it's like something that I think that humans are really good at. It's something that we our ancestors have done for a very long time, and I think that it's one of the like itches that herpetoculture scratches, is that kind of, I call it tinkering, but being in a process of adaptive management, kind of make a plan, enact the plan, observe results, adjust the plan, and on and on and on and on. I think that's just a really gratifying feedback loop to be in.
Yeah, couldn't agree more with that. That's incredible stuff. So I can't help but note, so we are creeping up around we're at like 2.5 hours at the moment. And what's incredible.
we got one question out yet?
Okay. So
that's the amazing thing is,
He'd warn you he could talk.
Well, but that's the whole idea. I mean, I feel like I could sit and have conversations like this one for 5 hours on end and I never get tired. It's always interesting to me. But I want to be mindful and respectful of your guys' time. And obviously we were mentioning before we started recording that we'd obviously love to have you guys on more than once. And I'm not at all, not necessarily trying to close out the conversation, because even if we are getting towards the end of it, we do have one question that we want to close everything with, but
where's your Harry? Fuck off.
But excuse me, but I feel like this is what's so fun about this is that we basically just had 2.5 hours of a great conversation, and we didn't even get to all the questions that we have, which means that you have to come back on. Have to. Absolutely have to.
That's fine.
Okay.
Happy to.
Sick. So I suppose with that, Roy, do you think would now be an okay time for the big question? Do you have more? How do you want to? I don't want to stop. I'm not trying to like slow anything down. Like, what's the?
Oh, we're fine.
We can keep talking, right? So I'll say this, right?
I may wet about an hour, but apart from that, I'm good.
You're sweet. You can go to the toilet if you want, right? So I suppose look, we're happy to talk. Obviously, we're happy to come back at some point in time as well. That doesn't
Both.
So I'll throw that one out there now. We did warn you that it was going to be a long one.
Hell yeah.
We're okay with that too, right? So it is what it is.
Oh, are we? Yeah. That's all.
Yeah, so feel free to truncate our responses, feel free to truncate my responses is probably a better way to describe it, because at the end of it just keeps waffling on.
It's definitely the opposite, honestly. Like,
exactly.
The idea is to allow for as much space and openness and ramble and meander, and so I guess one thing I think would be now might be a good time to talk about actually would be your guys' facility. I mean, if you'd be okay with talking a little bit about that, can you, for the listeners, give kind of like a blanket description of kind of what you guys are working with in that regard, in terms of like how the facility looks? Maybe you don't have to, I don't mean like make like a verbal blueprint. Yeah.
I suppose, I mean, look, we know that you guys have a YouTube side of this as well, right? So if you want to see some of those photos that we sent through, guys into it, feel free, that's fine, or throw them on your Facebook page, whatever you do, doesn't really worry us, right? So it'll probably help the guys that, the 2 or 3 people that are tuning in to listen to us waffle on about shit. However, we have our animals sort of split up into two sort of main sections, right? So we've got animals that are kept outside in outdoor enclosures, and they have a whole heap of benefits and challenges to them. And then we've got the animals that sit in our building. The building itself is set up with 3 main rooms. We've got a room for the animals itself. We've got a dry goods room, which happens to be the entryway, and then we've got a room off to the side, which is off a different walking system that has its own air conditioning, that has its own sink. It's got its own sets of tools and all the rest of it, which is our quarantine facility as well, right? So you go through a foot bath to get in there. It's got air extraction that comes out on a different plane of the building to other parts of the building to the main room, so that if there's something in there that happens to be airborne, it's going somewhere else as opposed to going and then getting recontaminated with the main room. I work in compliance these days, but I've got a background in construction of medical facilities and labs, and so having that background has enabled me to be able to do a few things that and sort of process systems in a way that allows us to minimize transfer of pathogen and things like that. It's not infallible. It's not an airlock system or anything like that. It's not but it allows us to change a few things that sort of work in a different way. So we've got a quarantine room, our main room, and then we've got our entryway that happens to have all our dry goods. The reason we have dry goods in the entryway is one of the important things working with venomous snakes is to minimize clutter. Right? You don't want shit lying around in the room. You don't want bags lying around in the room. You want to be able to go into the room. You want to be able to see everything in the room. And as a result, we've set that up. Now,
the front room's technically called the shitty clutter room.
Yeah, the front room is right. We have windows in the door to both the quarantine room and the main room, right? The reason we have windows in those doors is so that we can see if somebody's on the other side of the door before you walk in.
A step beside the window so I can see in the window.
We have our spare lights. We have all of our systems, our light systems and things like that are on the outside of the room. So before you walk in to turn the lights on in the room, right? Before you actually walk into the room, you turn the light on, right? So you're not trying to feel around in the dark for a light. We have emergency lights set up in the room. So if the power goes off, we have lights come on. Reason being is that I was working with a taipan in a storm. We had the power go out. It was 9 o'clock at night. And here I am holding a taipan by the tail with a hook. And I'm suddenly doing it in the dark.
Oh, Jesus. Fuck.
Now, I put the snake down and walked backwards to where I had a torch, put a torch on, you know, all's well that ends well. But at that point in time, the minute that I could get emergency power lighting set up, so if we had a storm, yeah, that was set up straight away.
Mhm.
Benefit about owning your own property is you
Yeah.
can, like, you learn along the way and you are able to renovate your
Yeah,
herb
of
room or
course,
your
yeah.
bedroom or whatever you keep your animals in to what you need for yourself.
Yeah. So then as Ty was saying, we built this ourselves. So that enabled us to be able to do a whole heap of things that we wanted to do. The outside of the building of that room, the outside, the back of the wall of the enclosure is actually the wall of the building, right? So there is no way that the animal can get behind the enclosure because the enclosure is the outside. So the only point that an animal can go is forward, right?
Mhm.
So if it happens to leave its enclosure, it's always going to be in the center of the room. And so by having that glass window when we enter the room, we can see if anything is out on the floor in front of an enclosure, so we can deal with it. We work on the 3-door system, right? Now the 3-door system is that there is always 2 doors closed between the outside world and the animal that you're dealing with. Okay. You've got the door to the facility, you've got the door to the room, which are both snake proof, and then you have the enclosure. So 99.9% of the time, the enclosure, the animals are behind 3 doors, right? But when I open one door, right, I still have 2 fail safes.
Mhm.
Okay. So when we're working with animals in the enclosures, we have the 2 doors shut. So the door to the facility is closed and the door to the room is closed.
The
And
sinks have
so-
covers so nothing can get out. If I think we've lost 2 snakes in the room over the years.
Yeah,
that we
two
found.
small pythons that we've
Yeah.
had get out.
The parenti as well,
Yeah,
but
parenti.
the parenti, you would always find parenti like where the sun was coming in from the roof and he
Mhm.
all 4 legs flat out lying in the sun, so he was easy. But
Yeah.
nothing can get out. It's just a matter of getting it in the room.
Yeah. And so as a result from that, which, that enables to put these windows into the roof, which act as lighting for the day as well. We have the heating set up on circuits. So different electrical circuits have a lighting circuit, and then there's a heating circuit, right? And then there's a constant power circuit as well, right? So we've got a circuit that runs the incubator and the air conditioning and things like that. We've got a circuit that runs all the heating, and we've got a circuit that runs the lighting. And so we have a digital timing system, a digital power system that allows us to turn the lights on and off whenever we want, all right, which also works on a timer. So we can then incorporate the lighting so everything turns on at the same time, everything turns off at the same time. With our heating, we use for a lot of our snakes, we're using a lot of IRC heating systems. So we're using things like heating cords with tiles underneath it, the tile sitting on top, which is simulating like an IRC type response.
Right.
Now we've learned what we've learned, we're starting to sort of bring IRA back into more enclosures as well. So that's the continual rejig that we need to do to improve on what we're doing. But these are things that we're looking to do. So we've got our heating system set up so that it's a bit like a cloudy day. So it'll come on for a couple of hours and then go off for 3 or 4 hours, then come on for a couple of hours and then go off overnight. And then overnight, the temperature just curves down. Now we're in tropical southeast Queensland, so our ambient temperatures are quite reasonable.
The room was also made out of freezer panels, so it sort of remained a constant temperature,
fairly constant temperature,
which makes it a bit easier as well.
So the ambient room temperature at this time of year, for the most part, is around 26 to 29 degrees, right? So as soon as it hits 29 degrees, the air conditioning comes on and rocks it back down to 26. And then overnight, once it drops below, when the outside temperatures drop, it will then drop down to about 21 to 22. In the peak of summer, it probably won't drop below about 26, right? Whereas in winter, though, the room will get down to about, we move the air conditioner onto the heating cycle, and we don't want the room to drop below 10 degrees Celsius, right? So we don't want the animals to get way too cold, but then also too, we also simulate temperatures so you still get some heating in winter as well, where, you know, these heat cords will come on for 2 or 3 hours to allow the animal to thermoregulate to a point and still have some response. Because the reptiles that we work with don't have they don't have no heating at all during winter. All right, so there is some heat, there is still the sun coming out, and it is still warming the environment. And the animals are usually able to bask for at least part of the day in winter in where we are in southeast Queensland. The other thing that we do as well is that we completely bloody lost it. I've lost my train of thought. We'll vary the food schedules as well with the animals that we're working with. So not everything is on everything gets fed on Wednesday at 4 o'clock. We will look at the animals and we'll gauge the animals on their health. And then from that, then we'll determine how often we're feeding, right? So we've got animals that will get large, they might feed once every 2 or 3 months, but then they might get 3 feeds over a week, right? And so it's a bit like a boom bust type simulation, whereas other species will go through a fairly regimed food response. We vary the diet in the animals that we keep. We use different types of rodents, so we use mice and rats, but we'll also add birds to a lot of our feeding as well. So we use things like chickens. We'll try fish on some species as well to give that up. And then with the lizards that we keep, there's dry food elements as well as wet food elements, as well as rodents, as well as fruit and vegetables, berries, and then there's supplementation across to that as well. What else? What else are we talking about? Design of the room.
I don't know. We just kept spending money.
Yeah, I just kept spending money, spending it. So yeah, so that's essentially the room setup. And then within it, we've got sinks and stuff like that, obviously to deal with the water.
Cooks
and then
in various places, so they're easy to graft, not just in one place.
Yeah, so we've got tools set up around the room. We have bandages set up around the room as well. In the case of envenomations, we've got emergency protocols set up for envenomations as well. We run drills on that, much as Ty's excited by these preparation events. You know, we've got signage inside our electrical box, right? So the first place a firefighter goes to a residence, one of the first places they ever go is they go to the electrical box for the place, right? So we've got a magnetic sign on the inside of our electrical box that says this residence has dangerously venomous snakes, right? So in an emergency where we may not be around or anything like that, and they've come here, hey, here's some notification as to what's here, and so they've got a bit of an idea what they're dealing with.
That's brilliant.
So yeah, it's all about preparation, not just for us, but for other people as well. Same thing with our envenomation protocols. It talks about what hospitals have what antivenom, how maps on how to get to it. It's got my medical history and it's got Ty's medical history in it. It's got people that they can contact, the doctors can contact to talk to other doctors when they're talking about envenomation. We don't want to leave it up to chance.
Not only Some doctors are like, yeah, no, that snake's not in this area. There's no way they were bitten by that. And you can't sort of say, you know, it's my pet sort of thing. They don't get it. Why would you have a pet like that? You obviously don't know what bit you, rah, rah, rah. Seen it happen with other people. So, yeah.
Talking to other doctors are a lot easier to deal with. So, you know, it's another one of these preparation events that we have. So yeah. And then, you know, we've got all the stuff that's outside as well. So the outside enclosures, we've got large monitors are outside. So we've got things like parentis outside. We've got a lot of skinks outside set up in various enclosures. Those enclosures have been designed in such a way that the animals can't escape, but then also things can't go in to eat them as well.
Right.
Every outdoor enclosure was designed with keeping a monitor in it just in case. And so it's all cemented down the bottom underneath, so nothing can dig through or anything like that.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
So
Yeah,
where are some?
Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So setting up, you know, for instance, in all of the outdoor enclosures, because an outdoor enclosure doesn't have an air conditioner attached to it, we've got to be able to mitigate for high temperatures. So we need to set up a micro habitat that allows the animal to get away from extremes in temperature, right? You know, I'll go on a slight tangent on this as well now. And so one of the things that we see is people go, oh yeah, let's simulate the conditions of a place. That's not what you want to simulate. You don't want to simulate the conditions of a location. You want to simulate the conditions of the microhabitat that the animal is going into. And that is not automatically the same as what the weather temperature, the temperature and humidity of that location is, right? So
right, yeah.
One of you guys are in Colorado, right?
Yeah, that's me.
I'm keeping a northern Pacific rattlesnake. I'm not going to shovel fucking snow into my enclosure.
You're not gonna.
Somebody. Sorry.
No, sorry. I was just gonna say you're not gonna Wim Hof the Northern Pacific rattlesnake. Iceman.
Yeah.
I'm sure I remember seeing something on Facebook about somebody overseas keeping a blue tongue, and there was snow in Australia. So she was putting snow in the enclosure. I'm sure I remember that. And everyone was like, what the fuck?
That doesn't surprise me. I suppose the point that we're making, right, is that we give the animal, we've got to be able to give the animal an ability to choose where they want to be. So they've got a concrete base. On the top of that concrete base, we put drums or plastic enclosure, plastic tubs that go into that have a styrofoam box inside it. They're then buried into the soil, right, with a tube that accesses it from underground. So that enables that animal to get to that temperature, that zone there that is about 20 degrees Celsius cooler or warmer than the environment outside, right? No. Depending on when, so cooler in summer, warmer in winter. And then we fill that with dry straw to simulate like a dry leaf litter, which enables the animals to estivate brumate in such a way that, you know, they don't get scale rot or anything like that. And then
constant food in there.
And then that's something that we needed to do. And then on top of that, then we've got a soil structure, water bowls, rocks, logs, etc., but access to UV light. Now, where we are, we get some pretty intense storms in
right, yeah.
So we've actually got roofs over the top of all of these as well to prevent excessive rainfall going into these enclosures, but we had to set the roofs up high enough that it would still allow light to come in from the side, all right? So they still get exposure to UV, they still get exposure to sunlight, and they still get some rain, but they don't get too much, and it doesn't top the ground. And so, yeah, in summer, that's what we found we needed to do is we run shade cloth over the top of enclosures that we don't have shade cloth in winter, because it's too hot if we don't have the shade cloth there, and then it gets the animals to a position where it's outside of their comfort zone. And so as a result, these are things that we work with. And there's a lot of trial and error as well, right? So you're watching things and go, shit, okay, it's going to be warm today, or it hasn't rained in 2 weeks. We better give these animals a simulated rainstorm. So they've always had access to fresh water via their water bowl, but we want to make sure that they get some rain as well, right? So we in. Ty has been able to use the snakes for other purposes, right? The diamond pythons in particular tell her whether or not it's a good idea to throw washing on the line. Yeah, is that it?
I hear the weather report. The weather report's usually wrong. I put washing out and it rains, but I've just learned if the diamond pythons are out, it's probably going to rain. Don't put washing on.
Oh,
I
no
love it.
way.
Yeah.
That's funny.
They always know.
Yeah.
So
The animals always know better.
Yeah.
But this goes back to what we were talking about before, right? When we were talking about lighting, where we don't know what the trigger is that causes the diamond pythons to become more active on a pending. We don't know what it is.
But I mean,
But they're picking up on something, right? Now, if you're keeping that animal inside an enclosure, you don't know what you're not providing that animal.
I mean, having said that too, like with the lighting and the UV, you know how we've all had a lizard or a snake. Is she gravid? Is she not gravid? Is she gravid? You've put them together. Didn't actually see her mating, but she's looking a bit fatter, and sometimes it's food and sometimes they are actually gravid. Outside animals, they bake all day. They will not box.
Yeah.
And it's gravid, to look for babies. It's not just, putting on a bit of a spread after winter.
Yeah. But I suppose too, that came into the design of the enclosures as well. So we needed to make sure that whatever was going in, it's not only is it that it keeps the adults in, but it keeps in prospective young as well. So we needed to ensure that was the case. We've got toads around us as well, so we need to make sure that we don't have things that's getting in. We need to make sure that we don't have rats getting into enclosures. We need to make sure that we don't have birds of prey getting in. We need to make sure that carpet pythons don't get into the enclosures to try and mate with our animals through the enclosures. I know a person that had a carpet python that he walked out, and here was a male carpet python mating through the side of an enclosure with a female carpet python inside an enclosure.
Wow. There was I have a friend who keeps tortoises outdoors, and he used cinder blocks as the wall structure to keep them all pinned in. And I guess the first year he had babies, they laid eggs in the ground, and when the babies popped out, they went right through the and so he was like, "Oh, I can't do that." So it's quite the hassle.
It's a learning curve.
So how did he get onto that? He just saw a little tortoise walking across the ground one day.
Yeah. I believe that's exactly correct. He was like, "Oh shit, I forgot." Man, yeah. So the trial and error.
Good problem to have, though.
Yeah, no, it's a quality problem for sure. Yeah, baby sulcatas running around like, oh my god, wow. But so that's actually something I'm kind of intrigued about, is the trial and error, because in my mind, one of the biggest, most daunting things about outdoor keeping for me is like, God, the amount of trial and error that would have to go into setting everything up. I mean, to me, sounds astronomical,
I think
not really. We live where these animals live.
I think
oh sure,
getting out in the scrub helps too.
Yeah, and yeah, Ty, we're also passionate field herpers as well, right? So we love getting out in the bush and seeing critters. I like taking photos of things as well, and so getting out there and seeing a lot of these species in the wild has certainly made a significant impact on how we maintain these animals in captivity. And so, the resistance that I see overseas to people keeping outside, I think is insane.
Is it more?
No, it's not.
Oh.
It's not. I just do not understand it. It's something that, when you keep animals outside and you see the changes for the benefit in those animals, you really start to work out whether or not you should be keeping those animals inside at all.
We put
Mhm.
And you know, the only reason we don't keep venomous snakes outside is because legally speaking in Queensland, we can't keep venomous snakes outside. If I could do it, I would have so many snakes outside, so many venomous snakes outside. We would set it up in such a way that there was still, you know, aviary systems inside a larger aviary style.
Right.
There was still multiple layers of
I hate to break
safety.
this to you, but we're renovating inside before you build
Yeah.
anything else.
No, but that would be something I'd love to do, but it's more or less impossible. And so because it's not, you know, we're not going to do that. We're not going to go down that road. But the benefits of seeing our animals outside.
We put Lacey's outside that have been inside for years. And within 2 weeks,
Yeah.
the black was just insanely black and the yellow was so
Mm.
you could see the difference in attitude. We felt bad. We were like, shit, like what have we done?
Yeah.
We should have had these guys outside for ages.
So this is something I'd actually be curious to maybe like pry apart a little bit more, because
Mhm.
outdoor keeping, from my perspective here in the US anyway, feels like a 10 times riskier venture, right? I mean, the number, you know, in Colorado anyway, I have the weather as a problem. You know, there are months of the year in which, you know, it's technically suitable for my animals to be outdoors, but you can have a random spike that drops everything down to, you know, we'll go for, we've had 50 to 60 degree Fahrenheit temperature changes in a 12-hour period here in Colorado, from the point where it's like, oh, everything's, you know, it's 75 to 80 degrees outside, and then the next day it's in the teens, you know, and it's just such a huge temperature flux. On top of that, I've got birds of prey, feral cats, raccoons, coyotes, skunks. I have there's fire ants. My friends who live in the American Southwest have scorpions and tarantulas, and you know, just such a host of predators. And I'm not suggesting that
It's all about enclosure design.
yeah, it's
And
all okay.
Keep outside what can handle that habitat, like animals that actually live in
Yeah.
our area,
Sure. Oh,
very
sure.
close to our area.
So,
as well.
we were talking before about scrub pythons, right? I'd love to keep scrubbies, but it's not something suited to where I live.
We used to keep them outside, but we'd have to bring them inside every.
Have to bring them in every winter, and you bring them in every winter.
That was a kind of a job too.
And
Oh yeah, I believe
That
it.
sounds
He
awful.
moved.
you bring
Yeah, no kidding.
bring them in winter, right? And the animal would sulk.
Yeah.
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 Here's this animal that's been in this large aviary style enclosure that can stretch out, that has good access to UV. It gets wind, it gets rain, it gets everything.
And after
And then you stick it in a 6 foot by 3 foot box.
and after a couple of seasons, we actually wondered if we were doing detrimental damage
Yeah.
bringing them in each winter because of the way they acted.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
See a visual, you'd almost see like a depression go into the animal, where the animal would sulk because it's been put into a box. It's like, yeah, you know what? This isn't cool. That's not what we want to do.
yeah, it's got to resemble.
Go with your feet and stop keeping them. You know?
Right.
Yeah,
It's got to
totally.
be a lot like if you're keeping outdoors and then moving in for the winter, it's got to be like going from sort of like you know, almost a miniature version of going through importation again. You know, it's like
Yeah.
it's
Right.
a wild caught animal anyway.
So,
right?
so the way a friend of mine has done it, and he did it in Melbourne, and it was a brilliant way of doing it, right? And I actually, it's how I think a lot of people could do it, and it's probably how someone like yourself, Phil, could do. How do you deal with this?
Mhm.
Where you set your enclosures up on the outside of a building, right?
Mhm.
And you have half of the enclosure inside the building, and you have the other half of the enclosure outside of the building.
Right.
And you have a tube that you can cap off.
Yep.
That stops the animal from being able to go outside.
Right. I've definitely
So
thought.
that allows that animal for a significant part of the year to be able to go outside. Now, it might mean that you turn around and go, you know what, I'm going to go away. Let's say you're going to go to Oman and Morocco for 2 weeks, right? And you're going there in the right time of year, right? So you're like, oh, okay, I'm gonna cap the animals off. I'm going to prevent them from going outside, because while I'm away, I want to make sure that they're only inside.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But while you're there and you're on site, right, you know that you can deal with it. Yeah, okay, you got 50-degree temperature fluctuations. Okay, that's not the greatest in the world, but the animals will learn to go
quickly.
into a burrow.
Very
So it might be 40 degrees hotter outside or 40 degrees cooler outside than what the animal should be normally typically subject to, but that animal will learn to go inside.
Sure.
The question that you're going to have is, well, what happens if I have one animal that doesn't go back inside?
Right.
And it dies, right? Well, it's died on your watch, and that's not a good thing. But the question is that animal something that should be reproducing in the first place?
Yeah.
The idea that every animal that is ever bred is meant to survive is lunacy.
Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah, I
You
agree.
breed snakes and you realize how hard it is to get a clutch feeding, and you realize how low survival rate is in the wild when you've got predators and them not wanting to feed.
Yeah.
Well, and I feel like there's a lot to that also, because in some ways, so something I've harped on before in the past on this show is, and just in various other places, has been that we are artificial selectors. Like,
Yeah.
Our intuitions about what should and should not go on and live are totally off. Like for example, and I've used this example so many times, is let's say I have a clutch of 10 ornates, right? And 9 out of 10 ornates hatch on a Monday. And that 10th egg waits until Tuesday to hatch, right? But those 9 that hatched on Monday popped out right when there was a couple of birds of prey flying overhead, swoops down, snipes all 9 of those babies and flies off. And the one who took a longer time to come out of his egg or come out of the burrow manages to be the one who goes on to do his thing and survive on. I mean, our intuitions about what does and doesn't like take on is not only skewed, but what we're working with are animals that are in artificial conditions in the first place. So it's like you could have a set of 10 animals of any kind, and let's say 5 of them thrive in captivity, and 5 of them, just don't, just never take off, never do their thing. You could take those same 10 animals, put them in a fully natural wild environment, and you might have an inversion of those numbers, or you might have an intermingling of those numbers, right?
Mhm.
It could be that half of the animals that thrived in captivity did very well in the wild also, and half of the animals that did not thrive in captivity did very, very well in the wild too. There's so many forces going into that. And I tend to fall on the side of what you guys are talking about a minute ago, which is I tend to trust that my animals know what they need to do to get by, for the most part, right? With some exceptions, because again, artificial conditions,
Right. Yeah.
Going back to what you were mentioning about having the half in, half out style enclosures. I know at least one guy here in the United States who does that, a guy named, I don't want to misrepresent him, but his name's John Castellanos. He's a guy I know out in California. And I'm fairly certain he did that. If I'm not mistaken, he had pens along the back end of his house. And I think they were half, connected, where there was some inside and some that went outside. Now, I might be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure that's what he had. And what I've had fantasies about is having long buildings, like a long outbuilding in my backyard, in which each wall of this long building is a series of pens that have that exact feature, where on either wall they're extending out into the outdoor environment with just a blocker in between of some variety, and kind of playing with that and having some options set up where the animals can get sun for a huge percentage of the year and things like this. And
I reckon you'd see such a massive change in the coloration of your Euros.
Oh, no doubt. I have no doubt. Yeah. I'm certain.
And you'd also, and unfortunately, you'd see less of them too, right?
Yeah.
Because
Maybe.
they start behaving like wild Euros.
Yeah. Well, you know, the
Uh-huh.
same thing happened when I changed from using sliding glass front enclosures to when I switched to the open top pens. But it's actually kind of been a positive change, because on the one hand, animals that first come here, yeah, they're a little more skittish and they're a little more wily. But I'll tell you, they learn so quickly that, because I don't get in there and fuck with them at all. You know, I'll take them out if I have to for some reason, but so much of our interaction happens, you know, just through hand feeding or observation. I don't like to fuck with them too much, you know. I'll
Mhm.
take them out, of course, to take photographs and things from time to time, but the animals learn so quickly that I'm not there to do anything but clean and give them food and just mess with the cage a little bit. I'm not going to come in and grab them. I'm not going to do anything. So the ones that do relax and learn to trust me are very resilient to change, and that trust doesn't get obliterated. Whereas when it was the animals that in the sliding glass front cages, if I mess that trust up somehow, they will, it's a lot longer before they relax again or out in my presence, you know. But you're right, if they go outdoors, I'm hardly going to see them ever, you know. So
we saw this, right, and we see this today, right, because Ty does 90% of the day-to-day interaction. She does most of the work again, right? And so if I walk out to the pits, everything just fucking disappears, right?
So I like walking out going, oh, look, they're still all here.
Ty walks out. Ty is the bringer of food, right?
The Snow White effect, you know, they're all just friends.
Yeah.
So I also can't reach them either. She's too short.
But I suppose that's my point, right? So there's a point. The animals see Ty not as a threat, but as a positive, right?
Right.
Me, I'm the one who is the one that's grabbing them up and checking them over for, you know, if something's grabbed, or I'm pulling them out, or I'm moving around their enclosure, or I'm doing this. I'm that person, all right?
Mm.
Do that deliberately as well, right? Because I don't want the animals to react negatively towards Ty, because Ty is then able to observe those animals in a function that the animals aren't throwing off threat displays or nervousness or anything like that, which is what I tend to see. I'm getting threat displays thrown at me. I'm seeing the back end of the tail as it goes down the tube. I'm seeing a predatory response for those lizards.
If there is a problem, it makes it a lot easier if one of us can see them normally.
Whereas Ty is seeing the animals interact the way they're meant to interact. Now, conversely, the way that you can mitigate with that is that you can use things like technology, where you can use cameras and put in a camera that's so you can see into that enclosure, so you can see what the animal's doing without your presence there as well, right? And we saw this awesome video that Ty sent it to me. It was this person, Nikki Camp, I think is her name. And she keeps Triple on Notice, the crocodile skinks, right? And, you know, crocodile skinks, squirrel mate eggs aren't meant to be rolled, right? Because apparently the embryo adheres to part of the wall, egg wall, and that if you rotate the wall, the egg, you can potentially drown the hatchling, right? That's what we've all heard, right? Well, this video completely throws that out. It's a video of their Triple on Notice coming along, digging up their egg, rotating the egg, and then reburying that egg.
Whoa.
Wow.
Now, this is the thing, right? This is not something that's artificial. This is video footage, and I'm pretty sure she's got her Facebook page.
Yeah, she does. Yeah.
It's either Facebook or Instagram. I can't remember which. But she's actually going to write up a herp note on this, right? Because we've encouraged her. So you've got to publish this. This is so important, right?
Yeah.
But imagine what we could have learned about so many species that we haven't, but we've had the option to as keepers.
Oh
yeah, totally. I mean, this is
this
is where.
So please look this up and have a look at the video. It is fucking mind blowing.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. I mean, this is where herpetoculture can really contribute to herpetology.
Yeah.
to the sciences, you know, is we can see things that just otherwise are not going to be observed.
Mhm.
So we tried this, right? So we'd always heard this thing about, you know, clutches of eggs going if you rotate them or anything like that.
Mhm.
Like it. So we took a Taipan egg last season, and every 3 days I did a quarter turn on the egg, manually
Mhm.
quarter the egg every 3 days. Hatched out just fine.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I had a friend.
Now it's a very short sample size, right? So it's not
Right.
something in any way, shape, or form. It's completely an anecdote. But at the same time, it's certainly enough for me to turn around and go, yeah, maybe if we get a couple of extra eggs this year that we don't really necessarily need to worry about, we might see how we go. We might bring those through to see what happens there.
Yeah. I have a friend who I'm not going to mention his name, and I'm not going to mention the species that he did this with, because I just don't want to get him in trouble. I don't think he did anything illegal per se, but
Mhm.
anyway, the point is, a good buddy of mine he found some turtle eggs out in the wild, and he brought the turtle eggs home with him on his carry-on, and they just survived. They hatched, and it's like,
Wow.
what? Like that, and I remember hearing that, and then there were a couple other things that made me feel like that might be kind of a misnomer, or maybe like it's not entirely accurate, or there's not something quite like fully fleshed out about that whole rotation idea, right? Which was, I remember I had some Xenogama eggs and some gecko eggs a long time ago, and I would just line them all up in an incubator. But the time frame between when the first egg was laid and the last egg was laid was a long time, right?
Mhm.
So the animals would kind of hatch out one by one. Well, those babies that hatched out would kick around and flip eggs over and all kinds of stuff. And those eggs
Yeah.
would still hatch and be fine. And then
Mhm.
the other thing was when Euromastics hatch, right? If I had a whole bunch of eggs together, if they were buried in a clump, or if I just spread them out in the incubator, the first one hatches and kicks around 5 eggs and they still pop out. It's like, this can't be the end. This can't be the
No.
only way to think about this. This can't be entirely accurate, right? Because if it
Right.
was, then theoretically, at any point in those incubation stages, those eggs that got flipped over would have perished, but they never did, you know?
We've also been handed eggs on a carer's permit, skink
Yeah.
eggs. Oh, I dug these up. They're probably not going to make it. I don't know what they are, but they could be snakes and we don't want them. So can you rah, rah, rah. We'll hatch fine.
Yeah.
Right.
So we're also we're licensed wildlife rehabilitators as well, right? So
Mhm.
yeah, just because we needed another feather for our bow. And so, you know, our resources are finite, right? Too. So we only basically do herps for the most part. We've done a few mammals here and there, but we basically only do herps. And that's where we've had a few things. We've had clutches of eggs that have been dug up by people. And then we have incubated those eggs. Now we know how to incubate reptile eggs.
Mhm.
But the thing too to remember is that these things are designed to hatch.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
man.
There's a hell of a lot of energy and effort that goes into producing an egg, right? For it not to hatch is a massive loss for that particular animal, right?
I feel like this should be on a t-shirt. Eggs are meant to hatch. Like, I mean, okay, that sounded a little weird. That sounded like a little political. I didn't mean it like that. But like, I'm just saying that I feel like I tell people that kind of thing so frequently because, you know, this idea that eggs, you know, like people talk about Euromastics eggs as sensitive. Yeah, okay, maybe they're like maybe a little, but like, man,
Not fine China.
it's not what I found. Man, I've used every incubation method imaginable. I've incubated at a 15-degree temperature range with varying humidity metrics as well, and they fucking hatch, man. Like, I feel like so often, if the eggs don't hatch, people are always looking for this thing like, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong? I'm like, well, it's very unlikely that what you did wrong was in the incubation stage. You probably fucked up way before that, way before, you know?
So your quality of eggs that you get through in the first, no fucking.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
right?
that's right.
The other thing to keep in mind, right, is that very few environments in the wild, right, in in a location have very constant temperatures and very constant humidity. There are exceptions, but it's the exception rather than the rule, right? So the animals that have a very selective, very strong correlation with a very small temperature band or a very small humidity band, right?
Yeah.
Those animals are going to be the animals that don't pass genes on.
Yeah.
They're going to be the ones that die off. Those eggs aren't going to hatch. Those young aren't going to be produced. Those females, the sperm isn't going to be produced in the males, et cetera, right? So these animals, the ones that are passing their genes on are the ones that tend to have a little bit of variance in it, right? Now, we've changed our egg incubation temperatures as well, right? Like everybody's egg incubation temperature for the most part is somewhere between 30 and 32 degrees Celsius. Most what temperature they tend to incubate at. We tend to incubate at about 28.5. The reason we do it at a lower temperature is we see better quality hatchlings for the most part. Animals got more weight on them. They don't look like they've been strung out when they first come out. Okay, instead of taking 62 days to hatch.
I'm so sorry, I've got to go.
Instead of taking 62 days to hatch, it's taking 80 days to hatch, right?
Right.
That doesn't matter.
No.
You know.
Yeah. What's an extra 2 weeks?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I have the same approach with that. It's better to have robust, healthy hatchlings. You know, I think I have that with the little tricolor hognose snakes that I hatch. They're tough as nails. I haven't lost a single hatchling of all of the dozens that I've hatched at this point, and they all have accepted a frozen thawed pinky mouse as their first meal, no problems.
Yeah,
ever. And I think
So
part of
that's-
it is that I incubate them at slightly lower temperatures. They take longer, but I have bigger, more robust hatchlings. And you know, I know a lot of people that they do out of the egg specials on their tricolor hog noses because it's such a pain in the ass to get them to feeding. They don't want to deal with it, so they just wholesale out whole clutches of them.
What?
You know, I see that regularly.
Really?
And
yeah.
Oh, that was
yeah,
a thing.
all the time. Yeah.
Alternatively, though, right? You keep the animals in such a way that you incubate your hatchlings at the right temperature, and they come out. They're more robust and they're healthier, and they have time to settle before they start to eat. The other thing that we do, right? We arbitrarily select, right? We arbitrarily select what we're going to keep, and we arbitrarily select what we're going to pair, right? Fair point for both of us.
Of course,
right?
yeah.
Most of us tend to pair on the basis of color, right? You know, so we've got a compatible pairing. Okay, that's great. We're going to keep the prettiest ones and all the rest of it. When holdbacks, we don't keep the prettiest ones. I don't care about the pretty ones. The pretty ones are in the genes for the pretty ones are there.
Yeah.
Right? I want the ones that feed well.
Yeah, totally.
Right. So the first two of a clutch, if we're going to retain animals, right, from a clutch, we want to keep the animals that feed well. Right. I don't care if it's not quite the brightest orange or not the brightest black, or deepest black or whatever. I can breed for that down the track if I really want to get a really brightly colored animal. But if I've got one that's feeding well, that's what I want. Because when I breed from it, we see that those animals tend to feed well as well. And a classic example of that is spotted pythons. So spotted pythons back in the 90s in Australia were well known to be shits of things to get feeding. You'd have to force feed basically every individual in a clutch of 10 or 15 eggs, right? Now, that's because they're designed to eat small skinks when they're born, right? They're not designed to eat. And so because they're not designed to eat mice and they're designed to eat skinks, it's hard work to get them to eat. But what we've seen in captivity is a form of domestication where these animals have become more and more, the ones that the animals that have been passing on their genes are the ones that tend to survive well in captivity. Ones that survive well in captivity tend to eat, right? And as a result, those animals that tend to eat are the ones that think. Now, you take a spotted python clutch now that is an F6 or an F7 or an F8 or an F9, F10, whatever it might be. Most of those clutches will eat straight off the bat without having any dramas. Now, I would say it's probably the same thing with ball pythons and corn snakes to a point when it comes to reproductive activity periods, right? So as I understood it, ball pythons, like most pythons, have got had a fairly set window of sperm production and a fairly set window of ovulation in the female, right? Whereas when you talk to some of the people now, and I was listening to a person talking about breeding ball pythons the other week, and they were saying that, no, all they do is they continually look to see when their females are ovulating. The minute that female is ovulating is the minute that they put the males in. And so they're getting clutches all year round from their ball pythons. Now, ball pythons have been bred in these sorts of numbers for what, 20 plus years? Maybe 30 years. So in a fairly rapid time period, we've seen massive changes in reproductive strategy in our animals, and effectively a form of domestication.
I've even seen the beginnings of this happening in Uromastyx. You know, these are animals that haven't been bred a whole hell of a lot in captivity, you know, with some few exceptions here and there. But in the last 2 or 3 years, I'm seeing more examples of double clutching in species that had never previously double clutched on record, and also seeing many more examples of off-season or out of regular season breeding too. And you know, I don't know if it's if that trend is going to continue or not. Like, maybe it will, but it's just been interesting to see in the first place, to see that that's just happening more frequently and in ways and in lots of different species. You know, up until, I don't know, 5 years ago or so, there was double clutching seen in Thomasi and Princeps, because they just do that. They actually probably will occasionally double clutch in the wild because it's pretty common, right? But then every now and again, you know, you'd hear about somebody, well, oh, my ocelota double clutched, and they'd not really, you know, it'd never really been seen before. And then last year, my friend in Canada, one of her ornates double clutched, and we'd never seen that before. And then, you know, and then this year, my friend had a Philbii do that. Uromastyx were not a Philbii, and they've never been recorded to do such a thing. So I'm sure that that's probably just going to happen more often. But I also wonder if
but the young from that too, right? The young from those that have been produced from that double clutching, right, are going to have a predisposition to be able to double clutch.
Probably, yeah. Totally, yeah. So it's intriguing. But I mean, the other problem there is that, like, so few of those animals are probably going to end up in breeding homes anyway, because so few people end up actually breeding their Euros. But I wonder, but you're still right. Like, you know, you across long enough time spans, definitely, like, more of those animals will be around in the first place. So it'll just have to happen more at some point eventually. Yeah. That's wild. I have to use the restroom real quick. You guys keep going.
Sorry, that's what I just did.
I think that we're all just gonna have to cycle through that process here. It's been a long conversation, but it's good. It's good.
Yeah.
One question I had to kind of deviate from where we've been, I'm curious. I mean, I'm looking behind you. You have this extensive bookshelf. I know you're both avid herp literature readers. And I'm curious, like, if there are any particular authors or titles that stand out to you as just like essential herper reading, you know, just for you personally, that really.
Is it obnoxious to drop your own book?
Probably.
I mean, we're gonna have links to those in the show notes. So there are.
Look, for us, probably the most important book for my mind is that one there. All right.
Biology and Evolution of Australian
Snakes by Professor Alan Greer. It is a scientific book. It has nothing to do with keeping, right?
Mhm.
But what it does have is it has a massive amount of information in regards to reproductive cycles, natural temperatures, maximum voluntary critical maximums, voluntary critical minimum temperatures. It's got things like oviductal young or sperm at what month of the year. So it has a whole heap of information if you're willing to trawl through it to find clues as to how you can keep animals in captivity in a better way.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that's an incredibly important book. From a husbandry point of view, I particularly like the Guide to series that was done on Australian reptiles and amphibians. Not because I was an author of 2 of the books, but that it provided a really good solid benchmark on reptile keeping. And basically the way that those books are set up is that you've got a front half of the book that talks about the captive management of that particular familial group. So it might be geckos, which include carpodactylids, pygopods and diplodactylids, as well as geckonids, or agamids or varanids or skinks, venomous snakes, pythons, etc., etc., etc. So the front half of the book talks about the management of those animals, and then the second half covers specific species or genera on how to deal with those. So I think those books are pretty important.
I'll go for me.
And then the Guide to Reptiles and Amphibians of Australia by Hal Cogger is an incredibly important book as well. And then Australian Animal Toxins by Straw and Sutherland on what's going to happen with the envenomations is incredibly important for a venomous person as well. But
I think it depends on what you want at the time too, or what you're looking for.
Yeah, I think like we've got a lot out of on books on overseas keeping of reptiles as well, right? So you know we're not going to keep Gila monsters, and we're not going to keep old world vipers, and we're not going to keep Asian pit vipers like that, right? But reading the Asian pit vipers book by Dick Visser, or reading the book on old world vipers by Tony Phelps, is incredibly interesting because it provides a different way of managing animals, right? And I suppose that's what we like to think with the books that we've released on captive keeping, is that while you don't necessarily have to follow the means of keeping venomous snakes, there's a solid section on husbandry in the front of the book that anyone can use.
Right.
And you know, when we wrote the Eipper book, I suppose, is the latest one that's been done by Edition Chimera. We wrote it in such a way that we wanted to incorporate the changes in herpetoculture and the elevated levels of herpetocultural understanding that we've seen in the last 20 years. And so we took, for instance, the Baines methodology in regards to Ferguson's zone application. So there was a paper by Francis Baines, I think it was 23rd, or it might be 2016. I can't quite remember which one of these off my head. And they talk about the invention of what they call the Ferguson zones, which is basically an irritance level of what certain species of reptile and amphibian would be suited to in regards to UVI exposure rating, right?
Right.
So anywhere between 0 through to, I think it's 3.5 is the top end of the line, right? And they basically graduated it into four zones, a Ferguson zone A, B, C, D, or whatever it was, right? And so we then took our knowledge of Australian elapid snakes, and then we applied that to both the the habits and basically the parameters of those Ferguson zones. And then we applied that to all of the Eipers. So in the species account section for each one of those species, we have then applied Ferguson zones in them.
Excellent.
So that's one way of doing it. The other thing that we've done too in regards to light periods, we've looked at the position on the globe where these animals are found and then applied the appropriate light cycle for these animals both in summer and winter, right? So animals that are close to the tropic have a 12-12. It doesn't tend to change too much all around the year. All year round, it's basically a 12-12 cycle, right? If you've got animals that live in temperate zones, right, the further away from the equator you live, the greater the fluctuation between winter and summer in regards to your light cycling, right? So if you've got an animal that has a strong light cycle requirement in regards to this shortening of the days causes a hormonal response to then produce sperm or to produce eggs or to wind down for the year because they're going to start to habituate colder temperatures. If you don't provide that to your animal with regards to your lighting, then you're going to have issues with that animal actually being able to adapt to cooler environments. Or you're going to have issues with that animal producing sperm or ovulating or producing healthy eggs, right? Now, we're not saying that it is critical to have this light system. We're not saying it's critical to have this Ferguson zone recommendation. We're not saying it's critical to have this temperature. What we're saying is that these are the systems that have worked for us.
Right.
Right. Or these are systems that we expect to work for them because it's worked in closely related species. Right. And there's a solid basis as to how we've arrived at whatever we've arrived at. So yeah, I've completely not answered your question.
No, you did.
Forgotten what the question is.
It's a good start. I think it was a question around what are your favorite herb books, and then it just went from there. So it's great.
Great. That was awesome. I have kind of like a softball question. So I mean, I hope you don't mind me asking, but is there within your collection, are there specific animals or specific species that just capture either of you individually more than the others, or is it
definitely?
Okay, yeah, which is that for each of you?
So I like my adders and my tigers. All of our adders and tigers pretty much have the name Nuffer, which stands for not another fucking adder, or and I didn't name them. I don't mind the Ingram's brown snakes, red bellies, olives.
Yeah, for me,
Perenties, obviously.
Yeah, coastal taipans, because there is a level of intelligence with those animals. I don't think it's intelligence in the same way that we talk about intelligence, but there's certainly some form of interactivity there.
I don't think the butterfly are that far behind them.
I think that I really like Shedekis butleri, butler snakes. I like perenties, and I like red belly black snakes. I've also got an olive python that I've had for 33 years personally.
Wow.
Damn.
So I'm going to be devastated when that animal passes. It was a wild caught animal collected in the early 80s by a snake catcher in Darwin, and then it came to me very early on, and it's still going strong. And that's been an animal that we've used in educational displays I've been doing educational displays for almost 30 years. And that animal's been doing educational displays as long as I have.
Wow.
He deserves retirement.
He does deserve retirement. But I am an absolute mess when that animal eventually passes.
Oh, I'm sure.
That animal's older than I am.
Wow, way to make us feel old.
Yeah, but see, that's an interesting point though too, right? So
yeah,
we've got animals here, right? And I often wonder this about people that keep tortoises and people that keep crocodilians. Right?
I think about this all the time too.
Right, and I wonder we see more and more and more, like, and I know of a few people that have got venomous snake, you've got elapids now that are in their late 30s and early 40s. Right?
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
And the animals are still alive now. Right now, they're still alive. And you know, we're at the collection, someone was showing us a coral snake, which are thought to be relatively short-lived species. And this was picked up at a reptile show as a milk snake, I think it was.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
I think he said it was a milk. They thought it was a milk snake, and it was actually a Central American coral snake. And this guy's had it since then, and he's had it for 15 plus years, and it was an adult when it came to him.
Yeah, right. I mean, I've got a damn Thomasai that he's 15 years old and he's still breeding. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm gonna wager Thomasai have got to be able to hit 30. I'm sure. You know, they have to. They have to. Sorry, tangent. My bad.
No. I think longevity is really interesting, and I wonder if you can breed for it, because I wonder if people are breeding, if chameleons are living longer in captivity now, and they're getting longer and longer lived chameleons because of their because I mean they've got fairly short life for the most part.
I think husbandry though is huge though. A lot of people get animals, overfeed, overbreed,
Yeah.
very short lifespan out of the animal, and then will quite loudly advocate that the animal's got a 10-year lifespan.
Yeah.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
Right. I know Roy has mentioned this with regard to his tricolor hogs too. Right, Roy?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, people say that tricolors only live 6 to 8 years maximum. And they are a highly reproductive species. I mean, you know, and so that in some ways that tracks, right? These species that produce a lot, high volumes of babies often have shorter lifespans. That's one of, you know, their evolutionary strategies. But I tend to think that it's probably more related to an improper diet in captivity, because people feed them rodents and they do not eat rodents at all in their native range, as far as we know.
and on a weekly basis.
Yeah, and definitely not on a weekly basis, right? And so, you know, mine are, I think they're 4 years old now, and I feed them primarily Reptilinks, which are, you know, these little frog sausages, frog and quail sausages. Sometimes I give them butt and quail, but I very rarely give them rodents at all, and they look like the healthiest tricolors I've ever seen so far. You know, who knows how they'll look in another 4 years, but I'm really curious to see.
How long do they take to get to adult size?
2 years, I would say. But I mean, I think that there are people that would say you could do it in one.
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
Or 18 months.
But that's my point, right? So
yeah.
If it takes 2 years to get to adult size, which is about the stock standard for a lot of snakes, right? If it's taking two years to get to adult size, there is no reason to think that animal should live an incredibly shortened lifespan.
Yeah.
Right? Because usually whatever it takes to get to adult size, you've probably got at least that, or double that realistically at the back end of its life, right?
Mm-hmm.
In between that, you've got your reproductive period. Okay?
Right.
So, you know, once the animal is hit age X, it's no longer going to produce viable sperm, or it's unlikely to produce viable sperm. It's unlikely to produce decent eggs, right? So that's what you've got at the back end of the life. At the front end of the life, you've got these animals that are getting up to size.
Mm-hmm.
The reproductive period is the period between adulthood and the end of reproductive. You would think that is going to be longer than 2 years.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I agree. I totally agree.
Otherwise, that animal would have to be just continually ovulating and all the rest of it. And that doesn't mean you might have females that are relatively short-lived compared to your males, but your males, they die.
Exactly. Yeah, that's another thought.
Same age, right? They're not getting the no, it's due to husbandry that the animals are only living 6 to 8 years.
Yeah,
Not due to longevity.
I totally agree. I mean, these are also snakes that, you know, I think that they get, you know, they're a wide ranging species. They're very hardy, they're very durable. And like we spoke to earlier, it's often that these are species that are successful in captivity, but they're also species, I think, that often receive kind of a substandard, you know, husbandry because they can tolerate it, you know. And so I also, you know, I have them with, you know, Arcadia UV lighting and halogen basking. And would you know it, they come out and they, like, you got these little fossorial hognose sand snakes that come out and bask. Like, what's wrong with these things, you know?
Sounds like bullshit to me, Roy. I don't know.
I know. I had a pretty hilarious moment of posting that in one of the tricolor groups on Facebook, and somebody responds and goes, "They don't bask. They're just doing that because that's the only way they can get warm, the way you're keeping them."
Oh man.
And I was like,
Wow.
I'm not even going to respond to this comment.
They did not think that through at all.
I know.
Really
I'm like,
well.
you mean, like, well,
It's not homeothermic, is it? You know, like
That's hilarious. That's a hysterical comment. Well,
I
even
know.
the same thing. So again, about the Euros, you know, I have a strong sense that they live way, 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 way longer than people assume that they're going to live and there's a few why, right? So the first is that chuckwallas, right? Chuckwallas have they fill a very similar ecological niche as a lot of Uromastic species. Similar habitat, similar diets, everything's very, very similar. Chuckwallas regularly live into the late 20s and into the 30s, right? We know that they do, especially just the smaller ones anyway. Then you have the fact that a Moroccan Uromastix imported as an adult into Europe died in captivity at a zoo in either Holland or Germany. I can't remember which. And the animal was north of 50 years in captivity. And it was brought in as an adult, right?
Mm-hmm.
That thing was probably 55 minimum, like bare minimum, probably older than that. And then you have Thomas Wilms in his book on Uromastics. He cites a collared Egyptian Uromastic. So, you know, it had a collar on it, right? A little identification collar. And it was known to be 32 years old and was still a member of a breeding population of animals. I mean, fuck, dude.
Yeah.
They're like tortoises for sure. And Cyclura, like they're going to be 60 plus, like human lifespan animals. I'm sure. I'm sure most of them anyway. Maybe not some of the smaller species, but you know.
Yeah, the reproductive strategies of certain species, they're not all going to be a K species or whatever, right? So
right.
They have different reproductive strategies. And so that makes sense for them to be really long lived. You are going to have other species that are short-lived as well, right? Like I don't know if you guys listen to Herpetological Highlights, but I was listening to a podcast that they did the other day on one of the chameleons from Madagascar, which fucking blew my mind.
Yeah.
That the population becomes functionally extinct with the exception of eggs that are in the ground, right? So these things, they give birth, they lay eggs. The eggs sit there for 5 to 6 months a year or 7 months a year or something like that. And the parents only live for 3 or 4 months, right? So the whole time, the animals, they get up, they within 2 months of hatching, they reach adult size, they produce a clutch of eggs, and then they wither away and die, right?
Yeah.
So then in the ground, when the eggs hatch out, then the cycles goes again, right? We know so little about so many of the animals that we keep. And assuming that everything is really long-lived is wrong, but also assuming that just because we keep them in captivity and we can only keep them alive for this amount of time is probably wrong as well. And I think there's a hell of a lot more reptiles out there that live for a lot longer than 10 or 15 years.
Oh, yeah. I think about like rubber boas are notoriously long-lived. I know of one that was that lived over 50 years in captivity. Again, that was, wild caught as an adult. And these are also slow growing snakes that take a while to even reach adulthood. And yeah, Heloderma. Like I was just running into somebody who breeds beaded lizards, and I was talking to him and at a reptile show, and I said, "Do you have an idea of how long these guys live?" And he goes, "Oh, well, the first beaded that was collected in captivity is still alive, and that was in the 60s.
Damn.
Collected as an adult." So he's like, so probably 70, maybe older. I don't know.
Wow. That's
That's awesome.
remarkable. Holy
Yeah.
shit. Wow.
But yeah, then you got other stuff. I mean, I think it also really depends on the niche of the animal. You've got, I think, like higher metabolism animals. It makes sense to me that they tend to not live as long. Like I think about the Spilotes, and I know that Pilatus, I don't think they've ever lived older than 15 or 16 years old. And
Yeah.
The Sulphureus that I hatched is among that first generation born in captivity. And right now my male he'll be 15 in 3 weeks. But he's clearly slowing down. Like he's got cataracts and
Have you started to see body condition loss?
No, his body condition is great, and he's very strong, vigorous, eats really well, but he can't see as well. I really notice that as the major thing is the cataracts, because he gets kind of crazy around food. Like I got to be careful, because once he knows it's food, he just like anything that moves is
Chew on everything.
Yeah, he's ready to go. And he's
what you'll tend to see
huge snake
in old reptiles is you'll start to see some loss in body condition.
Yeah.
Applicable loss in body condition you start to see.
Yeah.
Right. And in fairness, I am starting to see that in that Thomas eye.
Yeah.
He still breeds and stuff, but he definitely it's like his muscle tone and his legs isn't quite as what it used to be,
Yeah.
And he's
not squatting and deadlifting as much as he used to.
Nah, not as much as he used to. Yeah, not quite. He's had to pull a few.
He doesn't flex as much.
Yeah, he doesn't flex near as much as he used to. He used to run around. All his sons and grandsons are doing that for him now these days.
There you go. You got to pass it on.
Yeah, pass it on for sure. Well, so I don't want to be that guy, but I'm getting down to the point where it's almost 10
I think
p.m.
it's time.
Yeah, I think we got to close it. But I say that with deep regret, because this is an awesome. I really enjoy talking with you guys. And
wait. There's one thing that I have to say, because I just realized it a second ago, which is that the three of us were destined to meet at one point, because the three of us were all scheduled to speak at Herpeton too.
Yes.
No shit.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my god.
We were all going to be there. The four of us, I should say. The three different.
I wasn't scheduled to speak.
The three different.
The
three different boxes on Zoom that I'm seeing right now is what I mean. But
yeah.
But so
I was
hopefully we can make that happen sometime.
I was going to talk on varanids and blue tongues. Talks, and then there was going to be a talk on field herping as well. And look, COVID completely ruined it. But look, we've at the same time, what we want to do is we want to, when we do come over to the States at some point in time, we want to try and pair it up at some point in time and discuss it with Alan and Philippe, and see if we can come to, when we come over, we pair it with like a reptile show or something like that, and then we can maybe see if we can like do some form of talk or something along those lines to try and do the right thing, because at the end of the day, COVID was a bastard in that sense.
Yeah, sure was.
We got to make it happen. I just had to say that, because it occurred to me, like, as we're sitting here, I was like, wait, We were all on that. We were on that
Yeah.
bill. Yeah, we were on that
I didn't
lineup.
realize that. I didn't even, for some reason that didn't like stick out to me, but you're totally right. God damn. That's wild.
Yeah.
Small world stuff right there. That's so cool.
Yeah, but I really like the idea of that too, right? Where you get all these
Oh,
herpers
it's
all start talking about how to manage animals, and the management of these species is so different, and yet it's so similar. I can
yeah.
happily listen to you talking about uromastics and then seeing how I could apply the keeping of uromastics potentially to desert skink lizards over here, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And how you talk about keeping spilotes and tricolor hognose, how I can apply that to a fossorial elapid or an arboreal tropical elapid, right? And
Yeah,
so there's all these little bits and pieces and moving parts where I don't necessarily need to replicate, but I can use that as a feed for fodder. And I suppose, you know, one of the things that we learned when we were in Germany, we noticed that a lot of people had parts of their naturalistic setups. They had a kitty litter tray inside there, right? And then they had that sphagnum moss. And what they would do is they would have a wet section or a really moist section of the enclosure inside one of these trays that didn't end up ruining the whole soil structure of the rest. Now, where I was thinking where that would be a benefit was to be things like shingleback lizards and stuff like that, which have significant issues if you supply them with too much humidity. But I'd like to be able to give the animals an option to get into an environment that is more humid when it wants to go in. And I see no reason why Euros probably wouldn't benefit from that as well.
Sure.
And counterproductive to that, or a counter for that, the animals that like excessive humidity, they need to be able to dry out as well.
Totally.
That's right.
So, you know, the idea of dry hides and wet hides and things like that needs to be further explored.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm fascinated by that whole topic too. Actually kind of dealing with a little bit of a new thing in some of my Euros. I've noticed a handful of the older animals have this new thing that's happening on their tails where the tail whorls, they're normally kind of curved like this and they spike out in most species with some variety there. Some of them are starting to kind of, it's like almost getting like to be a bit of a deformity where the tail whorls are depressing more than they should. You know, it's like this really bizarre kind of like
a metabolic bone disease type thing.
It sounds like it, but it's definitely not that. They get they have so I've been consulting with a couple of vets now on this exact topic just because I'm trying to figure out what's causing it, you know. And so far it doesn't look like it's nutritional. It doesn't look like it's like shedding related, or at least it might not be shedding related. And it doesn't appear to be. So the thought that I've had for a long time is that it might be humidity related. But the thing is, it's happening in, again, it's just a few animals, but it's happening in 3 species, and it's happening in species that have both humid hides and some that don't. And I can't. I'm just unable.
Is it age related?
I was to say, could it purely be age alone?
It could be, but there's one animal that I have that's a younger animal that appears to have it. But
could it be related to kidney function, where the kidneys aren't processing the fluid the way that ideally they should? As they get older, you know, fluid functionality, the kidney.
That's an interesting idea.
And you can have that across the board if that was mainly in older individuals, but you could also have an outlier where you've got a young animal that's got slight kidney impairment that's also causing that, which is in the way water is being regulated within the body. The other thing to look at potentially is your water chemistry, right? So the way water chemistry works is an osmotic reaction as it goes across the field. Could that be a problem? Could it be an issue with salt, where there's salt in the diet of the animal, which is then having an osmotic effect in regards to the way the tissue structures are working. There's so many different things and so many different moving parts to this. The first thing I'd be doing is let's stick them outside and see if you get a functional change within a couple of months.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
that's an interesting idea.
I'd love to be able to do it. I can't. It's freezing here now, so I can't. That's out of the cards for the time being. But well, so that's the other thing is some of these, at least one of these animals was kept in a pen at the end of my shop, in which I opened the garage door every day, and he got hours and hours of sun every day. Now, obviously, it's not the same as being outdoors, but the fact that he got sunlight is a good thing in the first place. You know, it's not the same conditions otherwise, but you know, he did get sun daily. Yeah, those are all excellent possibilities. I mean, when I notice this happening, it's clearly not hurting the animals in any way. They're still shedding fine and still doing their thing. They seem to be okay otherwise. Or so I should say. What I should have said is it doesn't appear to be hurting them in any way. I obviously don't know for certain, right? So at first I was like a little bit frustrated because I was like, damn, like what's this thing that's going on? But then I realized I was like, oh wait, this is actually kind of good. This is like an opportunity for me to figure something out here. This is a learning opportunity, because I really want to know. I really want to get to the bottom of it because this is one of those things where I think it might be just related to the fact that not that many people have kept them for that long stretch of time, you know, where they're, you know, like maybe this is the kind of thing that only crops up when some animals have been in captivity for a long period of time. I don't know. I mean, there's so many things this could be. I'm actually kind of excited to try to get to the bottom of what it may or may not be. I've contacted a handful of other long-term Euro keepers who said that they have seen the same thing. And some of the, you know, one was like, I think it's too much humidity. And another was like, I think it's too little humidity. And I'm like, all right, well, I don't know.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see the blood work. I'd get the blood of animals that aren't doing it, right? And animals that are doing it. And then sending it across to a pathologist and seeing if there's any differences in the blood chemistry.
Some comparative analysis, yeah.
Potentially, which would then help indicate whether or not, if it was something to do with water regulation in the body, all right, because the chemical structure should be relatively similar in the animals. You'd need to compare males to males and females to females potentially, and obviously species. But that might be something worth looking at. And then from that, right, you get it to the right reptile pathologist. They might then be able to go, well, maybe try this in the diet and see if there's a change. It might take, though, the change might take 3 months or 6 months to actually change as well.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You're talking a structural change to the animal's physiology. So it's potentially going to take a long time to replicate or to resolve as well.
Yeah, sure.
Right.
Yeah. Not be able to resolve it in a month or 2 months. And so if you think, let's say, for instance, you're saying it's not potentially due to light, well, you may not see it for 6 months.
Sure.
It has to go through 3 shed cycles before it'll rectify.
Yeah. And I'm not sure it will, because I have one animal. This was the first animal I'd ever seen with anything like this. And it was an animal that wasn't mine. It came to me. It was a Euromastix yemenensis male that I had to pick up, who, because there's so few of those animals in the country, I had to get him. He was raised by some kid here in Colorado who I just was like, oh, something was wrong with the way he cared for this animal. It caused this tail deformity, right? And he's had it. I got him 2 years ago, and he still has it. And at the time, I hadn't seen anything in any of my animals, and he actually has had some improvement in that condition, but it's still, I think some of it's just not going to go away. I don't think that's ever going to change, because it's hard to explain, but it's pretty rigid. What it reminds me of is pyramiding in tortoises, this sort of what it looks like to me in some way. The only difference is that with pyramiding in tortoises, that comes on young, right? Because it's as they're developing, right? But in these guys,
you see that in snakes too, right? You can see that pinhead syndrome in snakes when the way they're grown, right? So they're fed a shitload of food when they're young, and they get these massive great bodies with these tiny little fucking heads.
Yeah.
That never resolves.
Right. Right.
So weird.
Yeah. So I wonder, but I'll keep you guys updated as to
Please.
exactly what happens there. Cause I'm gonna actually start with blood work. That's a great idea. I'll get some blood work done on him first.
Well, I don't know. Talk to the vet, right? Because
Yeah.
the other thing that, I suppose, we spoke about that when we did the book, right? So we did this Eipper book's got a section on
This
on
just feels
ailments.
like a shameless self-plugging.
It's 100%.
That's okay. Plug away.
Yeah, 100%. But we took it over to a vet and said, here, can you please peer review all this, right?
Mm-hmm.
The one thing that we want to stress is a good relationship with your reptile vet.
Mm-hmm.
Every keeper that has more than 1 or 2 animals should have a relationship with a vet.
Sorry, a reptile vet. A reptile vet.
Yeah.
Big difference.
Where possible.
Yeah.
I mean, we've all got to remember that some people can't necessarily
I get that.
deal with that. But then you've got people like that. Was it the ABARV or whatever it is, the association?
ARAV. Yeah.
Yeah,
ARAV.
the reptile veterinarian. So even if they don't have a vet that is one of those specialists, at least they can talk to somebody who is,
Mm-hmm.
to other vets, right language. It's an important thing. But I mean, this is a great example of where having that relationship with your veterinarian, Philip, is going to be able to help you sort of get to the bottom of what this conundrum is. I don't even want to say it's a problem because we don't really know that it's a problem. So it's worthwhile sort of going down that road, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Sand.
Yeah, maybe because you got them on sand. That's what it is.
Wait, Phil, you're muted.
Oh, my bad. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so I was coughing. I had muted it because I was coughing, but yeah, no, that's totally right. It's definitely the sand. That's they're totally impacted, and that's why it's happening. And but I'm lucky. I do have an excellent relationship with my reptile vet here. He's a great guy, Dr. Ken Shirella at Western Animal Clinic here in Colorado. He's a really, really good dude. Always super helpful. And I am going to ask him as well. The 2 other vets that I've been consulting with were not here. I just sort of solicited their opinion because I just happened to have contact with them on the interwebs. And I just said, hey, have you ever heard of this before? Have you ever seen anything like it? They're like, I have no idea what that is. And they were,
the one thing that I've always been intrigued about is how we present food and how much way that would have an impact, how that would have an impact on the animals that we're keeping.
Don't get Phil started on this
I've always thought about bundling, right, like vegetative matter together and then actually anchoring it into the enclosure. Right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Have to literally and pull it off because if they're not and pull
I was
it
really
off,
hoping
right?
you were going to pull out the
I do
Right.
this exact
But think of it, right? Think of all of the musculature, right? So they're going to be using their forearms. They're going to be using their shoulders. They're going to be using their neck, right? They're going to be using their jaws. If you give it to them in a bowl, they're like, They're not those things.
Yep.
They're not a fucking Pac-Man. Yeah, I do get animated and get excited. So sorry about that. But,
no, it's great. I love this stuff. I used to feed in bowls where I would just tear greens up and throw it in bowls. And I stopped doing that about, I don't know, like around 2 years ago. So now a lot of the adults, they get they may only get 1 or 2 types of greens in a day, but those greens are placed, they're either, I'll take an end of the stem and I'll pierce it on like a piece of manzanita branch. So that way it's stuck to the manzanita. So when they pick it, they have to pluck it from it. Or I'll stick one end of the stem under a rock and on a stack. So it hangs off the stack and they have to pluck it from the stack. And I think it's the same kind of thing. I think you're dead on. It's a more ergonomical way for them to feed. It's more natural. I do it with the babies now too. But the reason I started doing it was because of the babies, because when you put a pile of greens and a bunch of baby Euros run over to eat it, they'll start eating and then they shit all over that pile. So
Yeah, okay, yeah.
yeah, and so the other thing that it would do is, even if they didn't shit all over the pile, let's just say they, they came over and they ate half of the pile, the other half would sink together and it gets stuck, right?
Yeah.
And so I've had occasional baby Euros choke because they start eating a piece and it pulls and it has that spaghetti effect where there's this whole long stuff and they get it wadded up, and or it's too big, they get a piece that's too big and they try to swallow it and they're not really equipped to like scrape it off their own mouth.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
I had baby Euros die, not many, but a few, over the course of a couple of years die from that kind of thing. So I stopped giving them chopped greens because it not only did it save the actual amount of greens from, because, again, a bunch of them would just shit all over the pile of food. And then it also eliminated that choking hazard. But, so now it's fun. I actually just recently I just yesterday or today, maybe I put up a video, 2 baby Thomasite doing exactly that, just plucking pieces off of a strip of romaine, just pulling chunks off of it, and it's
Have you thought about behavioral enrichment when it comes to food?
Oh yeah, sure. Maybe in rudimentary ways. So the few ways that I do it now is, so other than that particular presentation, put it in different places all around the enclosure. I've also hung stuff from the ceiling, so they have to reach up and grab it.
Jump up.
I do put food into the ground and on other like various surfaces around the enclosure. So that way they have to find different stuff. Sometimes they have to dig for their food. But so far that's about it's about as far as I've taken that particular part of the enrichment.
So I was talking the reason I asked, I was talking to a keeper at the Australian Reptile Park, Jake Meany, and we were talking about varanid, what they do with their varanids, and they use pieces of PVC pipe and they stick rodents inside the PVC pipe, right? And they put it in so that the monitors can smell the rodents, right? But it's a real pain in the ass for them to actually get it out, right? We'll just drop this piece of PVC pipe in the enclosure, which is too big for the goanna to actually eat, but it chases this piece of plastic around the enclosure the whole time, and it works on the problem solving and things like that. I wonder if that's something that we need to do more of as keepers, where we are forcing the animals to use their brains more when it comes to right, because living in the bush is not an easy thing to do.
Sure.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
Actually, you know what? I just had a thought. I'm actually kind of wondering if no, I guess I wouldn't.
Could you do that with like lentils or peas or something like that? Is there like a food type that they absolutely go bananas for?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a few. I actually don't do. I quit doing lentils, but actual peas would be like legitimate thawed peas would be perfect because they love those things.
So you could put it inside like a biro, pull a biro apart, and then shove a pea down the inside of a biro.
Yeah.
Right. Just so they could just get the tip to it, but it was a pain in the ass, and so they'd actually be pushing this thing around.
Yeah, that's a great idea. I should
too big for them to actually get down, but it actually something to do.
That's a great idea. I'm totally going to try that for sure. Yeah, I'm definitely going to do that. Yeah, because I think it'd be great. The other thing I want to do for him is I want to have large enough enclosures for the ornata to where I can actually use piles of like manzanita that are like tied together as like a big acacia tree. So they have to climb all the way up to the top of it to get food that's on the top of this set of, because they do that. There's photos of ornates in the wild climbing trees, big trees. So I know
that'd be awesome though too, right? Because when they're climbing then too, right?
Yeah.
When they climb, they're going to be able to potentially see into the other open topped enclosures and like, oh, hell are you?
Hey, I know you. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely.
That's how to get nice colored up boys as well. The boys see color right up. There you go. Happy days.
They do. Yeah, that's true. That's great, man. See, this is why. All right, we got to do another one of these for sure.
Stop feeding his ego, Jesus.
And I don't want to seem like, I hope it doesn't come across as if I'm intentionally trying to end the convo for any other.
Not in slightest, no.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure.
You had to do this with me.
So yeah, well, that's okay. I would rather it would be more fun for me to like have to say, hey, let's do another because there's so much to talk about, rather than
Yeah.
like, let me just try to get more out of this guy. Come on.
Yeah,
let's-
totally,
You know, like
totally.
I love that we have more to talk about. So, with that, I'm gonna ask you guys the sort of like the closing question that we have for everything, and then we'll call it there. Okay. So, the question that we like to give everybody at the end of each show is, why herpetoculture? And you guys can take that as broadly or as specifically as you like, but the basic question is, why do we do this? What's either why as in why do we do it in the first place, or why as in why should we keep doing it, or why as in why should we not do it, or whatever you like.
Wow. I don't know. I do it because I like it. It keeps me happy. I enjoy what I do. I like learning. I feel put on the spot.
Oh, Ty, let's go.
I don't know. I just enjoy it. I like animals. Stop staring at me.
Look, I suppose, you know, I enjoy working with animals.
Yeah.
I looking at animals. I enjoy interacting with them. I also enjoy being able to see behaviors that if I only ever saw them in the wild, I don't think I'd necessarily be able to see.
Yeah.
And they're nicer than people too.
Yeah. I agree with that.
Most people, hang on, most people.
The other thing too that I really like is I like the fact that there is an exploration side to it as well. You know, I was given a lot as a child, both from my parents, but also from the herpetological community. So I joined the Victorian Herpetological Society when I was 9 years old, right?
Wow.
And I'm getting to see, and my parents used to take me along to the VHS meetings, and I would see people like Glenn Shea and Rick Shine and Gavin Bedford and Peter Merchant and all of these herpetologists out there, and I'd get to see them talk about working with all of these things, right? And so, you know, the keepers would then give me the time of day, right? So I'd be talking to people like Brian Barnett, who's bred and kept more species of reptiles than I think I probably ever hoped to. But he was the first person to breed coastal taipans. He was the first person to breed Chapel Island tiger snakes. He was the first person to really understand how to keep a lot of animals well in captivity. And the one thing about Brian is that Brian was always big on dissemination of information, right? Keep it to your chest. Tell other people how to do it, right? Explain to other people that there's ways of doing things. And I suppose having those people in the herp community give back to everybody else in the herp community is something that, you know, one thing that we'd like to do, and one thing that personally I like to do, and it's sort of why in some ways we've gone to writing books about these animals, right? Is it's not so much, we don't do it to make money. We make fuck all money out of writing books. You equate a time spent versus money coming in analogy to it, right? Where kids in China making sneakers make more money than what we do out of these books, right?
Yeah.
It really is it's slave labor to put these things together, right? You do not make money out of it. And so it's about the dissemination of information and trying to leave something better for the community that you've taken something from, right? So if everybody came along and they say, all right, no worries, I'm going to take 10 cents out of the pile today, but in 5 years' time, you put 50 cents back, there's always going to be money for the next people coming along, right? So that's sort of where we're, you know, it's almost like paying it forward a little bit.
Yeah.
So herpetoculture, I get personally out of it, I get to experience the animals. But then I think it's just as important to give back to the collective knowledge of the herpetocultural community And that's what we do in regards to the papers and the books, and also too, you know, sharing on podcasts and stuff like that, talking about different ways that the herpetocultural community can get information and share it. And I suppose, you know, sort of finishing up this sort of point is that people need to be more open to communication.
Mhm.
Right.
I think the
And
problem there though is there's always going to be egos. There's always
Mhm.
arguments.
Of
There's
course.
always going to be people that maybe didn't quite cut it, but want to get their name out there and make up the information that really shouldn't be made up.
Yeah, but as a result, though, eventually those people will be found out for what they are, right?
Eventually.
So
Right. Yeah.
the reality of it is what I would hope is that the exchange of ideas and the willingness to accept other people's ideas that isn't necessarily experience based, right? So you can have people that come along that have only been doing it a shorter period of time that can make some really significant leaps forward in the herpetocultural community, right? And an example of that is where they don't have the rose-colored glasses that we do, right? In that we think that we know what we're talking about, we think we expect, etc., etc. Somebody that's just come into it doesn't necessarily have that predisposition to turn around and say, well, no, this is exactly what that animal is doing.
Mhm. Mhm.
What it is, as opposed to what we are assuming it is, right?
Yeah.
And so somebody comes along and says, hey, triple anotis roll their eggs and the animals still hatch. If people hadn't seen the video that went along with that, I'm sure that there would be people out there that would be going, oh, that didn't really happen.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
of course.
Right? But the fucking video's there that proves it. It's
Yeah.
simple. So
Very cool.
well, I hope in a culture to be able to take from, but also give back.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Well, that's about as good as it gets. That's a wonderful way to cap off this convo. Really want to thank you guys again for taking the time and for
Yeah.
it's been amazing to meet you guys virtually anyway and have
Thank you
this.
for having us.
Yeah, of course. No, definitely. We can't wait to have you guys on again. Here, let me stop the recording just for a moment.